The image would not stop playing, and Shipmaster Tsaruk had already watched it 4 times. It ran on the central well of the war carrier Skarn V. Hale, thrown up in cold light for the whole command tier to see, and every crewmate on that tier had gone silent in a way Tsaruk had never heard from Viharn before. Not the silence of discipline. The silence of a thing that did not fit inside the mind. On the feed, a human female sat cross-legged on the deck of an enemy warship, and against the front of her plain gray tunic, tucked under her chin with one arm folded over its spine, slept a Viharn kit. Not a corpse, not a trophy. A kit living, breathing, its small ribs rising and falling, its ash-colored fur still short and unmarked. It was asleep, on the human. As if the human were the warmest and safest place in the galaxy. "Freeze it," Tsaruk said. The feed stopped. The kit's face hung there in the light, eyes shut, one ear half folded the way Kit's ears folded before the third molt. Tsaruk knew that ear. He knew that fur. He had seen 10,000 of those faces across his life, in the crash decks of Viharn Call, in the training pens, in the arms of broodmothers carrying the next generation of the Viharn war toward the stars. He knew, without being told, exactly where this kit had come from. "The Sethon brood," he said. "It was not a question. The transport we logged as destroyed at the Ninefold Reach, 19 days ago." His signals officer, a lean young Viharn named Orvo, did not turn from her station. "Confirmed, Shipmaster. The hull registry in the human broadcast matches the brood transport Sethon's warmth. We recorded it lost with all aboard." "With all aboard," Tsaruk repeated. That was the report. The report had been wrong. Tsaruk stood very still and let that settle into him like cold water finding the bottom of a well. Somewhere in the wreck field at the Ninefold Reach, when the shooting stopped, a human ship had gone through the drifting hulks the way scavengers went through a battlefield, and instead of stripping metal they had found a nursery. A transport full of orphaned young. The brood mothers dead. The escort dead. Only the smallest survivors left, cold and starving in a dying hull. And the humans had taken them. "Why?" said Orvo, and it was not really a question either. It was the sound of a mind, refusing the only answer available to it. Tsaruk did not answer, because the answer was the thing that had made him watch the feed 4 times. He turned instead to the broader tactical well, where the disposition of the war hung in soft light, the Viharn ascendancy in deep red, the human expeditionary fleets in cold white, the long gray smear of contested space between them that had swallowed 11 years and more Viharn dead than the songs would ever name. His people were winning. Slowly, expensively, but winning. The humans were fewer, their worlds younger, their fleets stretched. Every Viharn Kresh master had promised the same thing to every generation of kits sent into that gray. The humans were vermin who burned the young of their enemies, and the Viharn would scour them from the black. That was the story. Tsaruk had recited it himself, standing over new war forms freshly out of their final molt, telling them what waited for them and why they must not fall into human hands. The humans burned the young. On the feed, the human female shifted her weight so the sleeping kit would not wake, and drew a thin silver blanket a little higher over its shoulder. "Shipmaster," Orvo said quietly, "if the fleet sees this." "The fleet will see this," Tsaruk said. "The humans made certain of it. They did not encrypt the broadcast. They sent it wide on our own warbands so that every Viharn ship from the Reach to the Call would find it waiting." He watched the human draw the blanket higher. "They want us to watch." He understood then fully what he was looking at, and the understanding sat in his gut like a swallowed stone. It was not mercy. Mercy he could have dismissed as weakness. This was worse than mercy. This was a claim. Every Viharn knew the oldest law, older than the ascendancy, older than the war forms and the star fleets, older than the first blade. Before the Viharn learned to make war, they had learned to keep their young alive through the long killing winters of Viharn Kyle, and the law of that first cold was simple and absolute. The one who keeps an orphan warm through its first winter becomes its veil, Its blood parent and the bond that forms the Veloth stands above all other bonds, above command, above clan, above the warlord himself. A Viharn with a living veil owed that veil before it owed the ascendancy, and a veil who was threatened would be answered by every kit they had ever warmed, for as long as those kits drew breath. It was a law that had never once, in the whole memory of the Viharn, been claimed by a thing that was not Viharn. Until 19 days ago, when a human sat down on a cold deck with a starving kit and gave it the front of her own body for warmth. "Shipmaster," Orvo said, "your orders." Saruk looked at the frozen image one more time. The human's face was plain, not beautiful the way the propaganda forms rendered human faces to make them monstrous, and not monstrous either. Just a face, tired around the eyes, calm. She was not looking at the camera. She had almost certainly forgotten it was there. Her whole attention was bent down toward the small, sleeping thing against her chest, and there was nothing performed in it, nothing staged, and that was the part that would break the fleet apart when they saw it. You could argue with a speech. You could not argue with the way a person's shoulders curved around something they had decided to keep alive. "Send the feed to command," Saruk said. "Flag at Warlord's eyes, and Orvo, get me everything the archives hold on the human vessel. Name, class, and the name of whoever gives it orders." Orvo's claws moved across her station. A moment later a white shape resolved in the tactical well, long and unlovely, a working ship with none of the cruel elegance of a Viharn war carrier. "Human Expeditionary Vessel," she read. "They call it Solace. 3rd Expeditionary Fleet flagship, and the officer of record," she stopped. "Say it." They gave the flagship of an entire fleet to someone very young, shipmaster. Their file lists her as Fleet Admiral. But by their own reckoning of years, she is barely past the age at which we would send a war form to its first blooding. Orvo turned at last, and her eyes had the flat brightness of a Viharn who has seen the ground shift under a certainty she was raised on. "Her name is Ren Halloran, and she is the one who is keeping our young warm." Admiral Ren Halloran had not slept in her own bunk in 19 days, because the kits would not settle unless someone was there. And it turned out that someone was her. She sat now on the deck of her day cabin with her back against the base of the bunk, and 6 warm shapes arranged around and across her in the particular tangle they insisted on every night. The ash-gray one, the first one, the one she'd pulled out of the cold with her own hands, slept against her chest where it always slept, one paw hooked into the seam of her tunic like it did not intend to let her leave. The others had claimed the rest of her. 1 across her thighs, 2 curled into the crook of each arm, 1 stretched full length down her shin with its chin on her boot. The 6th, the restless one, the one the deck crew had started calling Cricket because it never stopped moving, had wedged itself behind her neck and gone to sleep there like a scarf. "You could requisition a chair," said Idris Vale from the cabin door. "They don't like the chair." Ren didn't open her eyes. "The chair moves." Her flag captain came in and stood over the pile of them, a big weathered man 20 years her senior who had served under 4 admirals before her and had made no secret, on the day she took the flag, of thinking her too young for it. He looked down at the kits now with an expression she had learned to read as the one he used when he did not want to say a thing out loud. "Say it, Idris." "The broadcast went out 4 hours ago. Every Viharn band, unencrypted like you ordered." He crouched, slow with his knees so they were closer to level. "Command's going to have my hide for not stopping you. They're going to have yours for sending it." "Let them." "Ren," he rarely used her name. "You put a human admiral cradling an enemy child on every enemy channel in the theater. You handed them a picture. Do you know what a picture like that does to a war?" She opened her eyes. On her chest the ash-gray kit made a small sound in its sleep, and without seeming to think about it, she laid 2 fingers along its spine until it went quiet. "I know exactly what it does," she said. "That's why I sent it." She had not planned any of it. That was the thing she could not make command understand in her reports, and the thing she did not bother trying to make Idris understand now. There had been no strategy in the wreck field at the ninefold reach. There had been a boarding team in hardsuits moving through a dead transport looking for intelligence, and a lieutenant's voice on the channel gone strange and thick, saying, "Admiral, you need to come see this." And then Wren in a suit of her own standing in a cold nursery deck full of small still shapes, most of them gone, and one of them, lifting its head off the frozen floor to look at her with eyes the color of a low fire, too weak to run, too young to know it should be afraid, and making a sound she would hear for the rest of her life, a thin, cracked, hopeless little sound, the sound a living thing makes when it has stopped believing anyone is coming and something comes anyway. She had taken off her helmet, which every protocol in the fleet forbade her to do, and she had picked it up, and it had stopped making the sound. That was all. That was the whole strategy. Everything after the 5 others they found alive 2 decks down, the medical bay turned into a nursery, the war band broadcast, the storm she knew was coming from both sides of the war, all of it came after, and all of it came from that one moment where a cold thing got warm in her arms and decided she was the reason. "They're going to come for them," Idris said. "You understand that, the V-Harn. These aren't strays, Wren, I don't even know what they are to them. But they're not going to let a human keep a hold full of their young. They'll send someone." "Then they'll send someone." Wren looked down at the tangle of them, the 6 small survivors of a war that had killed everything else they'd ever known. Cricket stirred behind her neck, the ash-gray one's paw tightened in her tunic. "And I'll tell them the same thing I'm telling you," she said, very quietly so as not to wake them. "They're staying." The order came down from the warlord's flagship 11 hours after the broadcast, and it was exactly the order Tsaruk had known it would be, and it was still worse to read than to expect. "Reclaim the brood. Failing reclamation, expunge it. Under no circumstance permit the human claim to stand. Expunge it." Tsaruk read the word 3 times, alone in his shipmaster's cell with the hatch sealed, and each time it read the same. The warlord Draco's V-Henkal, supreme of the ascendancy, keeper of the war, had looked at the image of 6 orphaned kits alive and warm, and had decided that the cleanest solution to the problem they represented was to make them dead. Not because they were traitors, they were infants, they had betrayed nothing. But because a live kit in human arms was a live argument, and a dead kit was only grief, and grief could be shaped into rage and pointed back across the gray at the humans. The humans burned the young. It was so much easier to keep telling the fleet that story if the young in question were, in fact, burned. Tsaruk had killed in this war. He had done things the songs would name, and things the songs would never name. He was a shipmaster of the ascendancy, and he had never once, before this hour, questioned an order from the warlord's own hand. He questioned this one. He did not question it out loud. He was not a fool, and he was not, whatever else this hour was making of him, a traitor. But he sat in his sealed cell and turned the order over and found that it would not go down, and after a long while he understood why. It was not the killing that stopped in his throat. It was the law. Draco's was ordering him to kill V-Harn kits who had a living veil, and it did not matter to the law that the veil was human. The law did not ask what species kept the orphan warm. The law only asked whether the orphan had been kept warm, and by whom, and whether that one still lived. If the human female still lived, then those 6 kits had a veil, and to expunge them was not policy. It was the oldest crime the V-Harn had a word for. It was veil breaking, and any V-Harn who did it would carry that break in front of every ancestor who had ever survived a winter. Tsaruk keyed his hatch and went back up to the command tier, and told Orvo to lay in a course for the human flagship Solace, and to raise, ahead of them, a flag of parley. "We're not to parley, shipmaster," Orvo said carefully. "The order was reclaim or expunge." "I am going to reclaim," Tsaruk said. "One does not reclaim a brood by firing on the hull that holds it." One goes aboard and one asks for it back, and one observes what the humans have done, so that command may know what it is dealing with. He watched the white shape of the Solace grow slowly in the tactical well as the Skarn V hail came about. Those are my terms to the warlord. Aboard and asking. Send the flag. It was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that Saruk needed to see it with his own eyes, the human, the kits, the thing between them, before he decided what kind of Viharn he was going to be for the rest of this war. But a shipmaster did not say that to his signals officer, and so he said reclaim, and Orvo sent the flag. And across the gray, a young human admiral looked at a Viharn parley request blooming on her board and did something no Viharn commander expected. She said yes. The Viharn shuttle mated to the Solace's flank with a shudder Ren felt in her boots, and when the hatch cycled open, she was standing there to meet it with her hands empty and 6 kits arranged behind her legs. She had not planned that part either exactly. She had planned to leave them in the day cabin under guard, but the ash-gray one had refused to be left, and where the ash-gray one went the others went. And so when the Viharn shipmaster ducked his enormous armored head under the hatch frame and stepped onto her deck, the first thing he saw was a small human woman, and the second thing he saw was his own people's young pressed against the backs of her knees, watching him come. Ren had never stood this close to a living Viharn. The dead ones she had seen, everyone in the fleet had, but the propaganda and the after-action photos had not prepared her for the sheer architecture of the thing. He stood a full head and shoulders above her tallest officer, plated in dark chitinous armor that was not armor at all but his own hide, grown that way, banded and ridged along the arms and the long jaw. His hands ended in claws he could have closed around her skull. His eyes were the same low-fire color as the kits. He smelled of ozone and cold metal and something underneath that was almost animal, almost warm, and at the smell of it, every kit behind her went rigid. Then the ash-gray one made a sound. It was not the hopeless cracked sound from the wreck. It was a new sound, low and buzzing, that Ren had never heard from any of them, and it rolled out of that small body with a volume no thing that size should have produced. The other 5 picked it up. 6 kits, none of them longer than her forearm, stood in the shadow of her legs and made a noise at the huge armored warrior in the hatchway that raised the hair on Ren's arms, and the warrior stopped. He did not just pause. He stopped the way a man stops at the edge of a drop. His weight came back off his front foot. His head lowered a fraction, his jaw came down, and his eyes went to the kits and stayed there. And for a long moment the most dangerous thing Ren had ever seen stood absolutely still on her deck because 6 babies had told it to. Easy, Ren said to the kits, not to him. She crouched slow and put her hand down among them, and the buzzing broke apart into ordinary unhappy kit sounds. Easy. He's not touching you. Nobody's touching you. The ash-gray one climbed half into her lap and put itself between her body and the Viharn, which she had learned meant it had decided she was the thing to be guarded, and she let it. When she looked up, the shipmaster was watching her hand. "You speak to them," he said. His voice came out of a translation collar at his throat, flat and mechanical, but the thing under it was not flat. "As a veil speaks." "I don't know that word." "No," the Viharn said slowly. "You would not." He straightened with visible effort, the way a man straightens who has been holding a great weight and has decided to keep holding it a while longer. "I am Saruk, shipmaster of the war carrier Skarn V Hail, of the ascendancy of the Viharn. I have come under parley. You are the human called Halloran." "Ren Halloran," she stood. The ash-gray kit came up her body as she rose and settled against her chest, glaring over her shoulder at Saruk with its ears flat, and she left it there. "You've come for them." "Yes." "You're not getting them." "I know," said Saruk, and that was the first thing he said that surprised her. Saruk had rehearsed the parley across 11 hours of dark. He had built it as a shipmaster builds an engagement. The demand, the pressure, the graduated threat, the offered face-saving path by which the human could surrender the brood and call it something other than surrender. He had a dozen levers, and he had meant to pull them one by one until the human broke. He abandoned all of it in the first 30 seconds, because he had walked onto her deck expecting to find kits that had been fed and housed by an enemy, and instead he had found kits that had chosen. He knew the difference. Every Viharn knew the difference in the body below thought. A fed kit tolerates the hand that feeds it. A chosen kit puts itself between its veil and the world. When those 6 small bodies had stood in the human's shadow and turned the warding cry on him, the cry a kit makes only for the one thing it has decided is its own, the cry Saruk had last heard from his own Kresh siblings a lifetime ago on Viharn Call. He had stopped without deciding to stop, because the warding cry went into a place in him older than his rank. And the human had not flinched at it, and had not commanded it, and had not used it. She had soothed it. She had put her hand down into the middle of a warning that would have frozen a war form and made it into nothing, into ordinary comfort, because to her it was not a sacred cry at all. It was just her frightened children making noise. She did not know what she had. That was the vertigo of it. She had claimed the single most binding thing in Viharn law, and she thought she had merely refused to let some animals die. "Walk with me," Ren said. "You came to see what we've done with them, so see it." She turned her back on him, turned her back on a Viharn shipmaster, which no enemy of the Ascendancy had done and lived, and which she did with the unbothered ease of a person who had genuinely not considered that he might strike, and she walked into her ship, and the kits flowed after her in a loose gray tide, and Saruk, after a moment, followed the kits. The human warship was ugly and warm. Saruk had boarded human hulls before, always with a blade, always in the dark, and he had known them as cramped, rattling things that stank of fear. This was the same kind of hull, and it was nothing like that. The corridors were narrow and low for a Viharn, but they were lit soft and gold, and human crews stood back against the walls to let him pass with expressions he could read even across the species gap. Fear, yes, but under the fear a hard, bright hostility that was not the hostility of prey. These were not vermin. He had been told they were vermin for 11 years, and here they were, standing their ground in their own passageways beside their Admiral with their jaws set, and not one of them vermin. They came to a space the humans had clearly rebuilt. It had been a medical bay. The fittings were still there. Now it held 6 small nests of folded silver blanket, a warmth lamp rigged from ship parts, bowls, a scatter of objects the humans had made for the kits to worry at, and along one bulkhead a chart where someone had recorded, in a human hand, 6 names and 6 climbing weight lines, and 100 small notations of the kind a Kresh master keeps. Saruk stood in the middle of it, and felt the floor of his certainties give way. "You named them," he said. They needed names. Ren set the ash-gray one down among the nests, and it immediately climbed back up her leg. "That one's Ash. That's Cricket, the loud one. Bishop, Pepper, Fen, and the little one asleep is Sunday, because that's the day we found her." She said the names the way a person says the names of their own. "What do you call them, where you're from?" "We do not name them," Saruk said, "until they survive their first winter. Before that we do not let ourselves." The words came out of him without permission. "Too many do not survive. A name is a debt to the future. We do not spend it early." Ren looked at him for a moment. "That's the saddest thing anyone's ever told me," she said, and turned back to the kits. She showed him the whole of it, and he could find no crack in any part. She showed him the feeding logs, the fevered night in the second week when Fen had nearly died, and the human medical officer had sat up with it for 20 hours. The diagram some crew member had drawn from nothing but observation of how a Viharn kit's jaw articulated, so they could shape the bottles right. She showed him where they slept, which was on her, all of them, every night, and she said it plainly and without embarrassment. And Saruk understood that this small human had not slept unburdened in 19 days and had not thought of it as a burden. Everything he had come to accuse her of, she had already done, and it was the opposite of the crime. She had not stolen the brood. She had done the one thing that the Viharn, for all their law and all their winters, had failed to do at the ninefold reach. She had gone back into the cold hull and gotten the young out. The escort was destroyed, Saruk said finally. He was looking at the weight chart at the 6 climbing lines, and he did not look at the human when he said it. The brood mothers with it. Our forces logged the transport as lost and did not board. We did not go back for them. He made himself say the rest. You did. Somebody had to. You are our enemy. Yeah, Ren said, and you left 6 babies to freeze and I'm the enemy. There was no triumph in it, she said it tired. I'm not trying to score off you, shipmaster. I genuinely don't understand what happened out there. You people fight like the war is the only thing in the universe. And then you leave your own kids in a dead ship because the ship's on the wrong side of a battle line. Help me understand that, because I've been staring at it for 19 days and I can't. Sarek was quiet for a long moment. Ash had come to sit on the human's foot again, leaning its small weight against her shin, one ear turned back toward the Viharn to keep track of him. On the bulkhead, the 6 names waited in their careful human letters. The transport fell out of formation under fire, he said at last. To go back for it would have cost ships. The doctrine is clear. The brood is the future, but the war is the present, and the present must not be spent for the future or there will be no one left to hold either. So the doctrine says. He heard how it sounded, spoken aloud in a warm gold room to a human who had done the arithmetic differently. I have recited that doctrine over young Viharn myself. I told them the humans would burn them if they fell. I told them to fear capture more than death. And instead we kept them warm, Ren said quietly. Instead you kept them warm. Saruk looked at the warmth lamp the humans had built out of scavenged parts, its soft orange glow over the folded blankets, and the oldest law of his people moved in him like a thing waking. There is a word, he said. Veil. It means the one who keeps an orphan warm through its first winter. Among us it is the deepest bond there is, deeper than clan, deeper than command, deeper than the warlord's own word. A veil is owed before all others, and a veil who is threatened is answered by everyone they have ever warmed, for as long as those warmed ones live. He turned and looked down at the small human who had no idea she was standing at the center of 10,000 years of Viharn law. You have made yourself their veil, Admiral Halloran. You did it without knowing. And by the law that made my people, that bond stands above the warlord who has ordered me to take these kits from you. Ren absorbed this. She looked down at Ash on her foot and at the 5 others sprawled in their nests and back up at him. Okay, she said. Then here's my problem, and maybe you've got the same one. I'm never giving them back. Not to be soldiers, not to be killed, not for anything. So whatever your warlord ordered, it's not happening. She folded her arms. You said a veil whose threatened gets answered. Am I threatened, shipmaster? Saruk thought of the order in his sealed cell. Reclaim or expunge. He thought of the warlord Dracos, who did not care what the oldest law said, who cared only that a human woman had turned 6 dead arguments into 6 living ones and broadcast them across his whole fleet. Yes, he said, you are. He did not take the kits. He could not have, and after that room he did not want to, and both of those facts terrified him equally. Saruk went back across to the Skarn V. Hale and sealed himself in his cell and composed his report to command, and he wrote it as close to true as a Viharn could write and still keep his hide, which was that the brood could not be reclaimed without destroying it, because the kits would not be separated from the human and would die of the grief fever if forced, that the human vessel was defended and any expunging strike would cost ships for no strategic gain, and that the human commander had, in his direct observation, established a Veloth over the brood, whether she understood it or not. He hesitated a long time over that last line. To put the word Veloth in a report to the warlord was to hand Dracos a problem he would rather solve by pretending it did not exist. But it was true, and Saruk found, to his own surprise, that he could not leave it out. A shipmaster who filed a false reading of the ground was no shipmaster. He had spent 11 years telling the truth of what he saw to command, even when the truth was ugly. He was not going to start lying now because the truth had become sacred. He sent it. The answer came faster than any answer he had ever received from the warlord's flag, and it was 3 words. Then take her. Saruk read it and understood the whole shape of what was going to happen, and he understood, too, that he was standing at the place where his life divided. Dracos had seen the flaw in the law and meant to cut it out at the root. The Veloth stood above the warlord, but only while the Veil lived. Kill the Veil and the bond died with her, and the kits became, once more, only orphans, reclaimable or expungible at the Ascendancy's pleasure. Dracos was not going to fight the oldest law. He was going to murder the human who had invoked it and pretend the law had never been touched. Then take her. Saruk sat with the order a long time. Then he did the thing that ended his life as a shipmaster of the Ascendancy and began whatever he was going to be instead. He opened a channel not to command, and not on any warband but narrow and tight, and aimed at a single ugly white warship across the gray. And when the young human Admiral's face resolved on his screen, tired and plain and watchful, he said the words that no Viharn had ever said to a human in the whole 11 years of the war. They are sending killers for you, Saruk said. Not for the brood, for you, because your death unmakes the bond, and the bond is the only thing they cannot break by force. He paused. I am telling you this because I would rather break with my warlord than break the law that made my people. Guard yourself, Veil, and guard them. Ren Halloran looked at him for a long moment through the screen. Come across, she said. Bring anybody on that ship who thinks like you do, because I've got a feeling you just made the same choice I did, shipmaster, and there's no unmaking it now. A small gray head pushed into the bottom of the frame, Ash, climbing into her lap, glaring at the screen out of habit. And they'll want to see you again anyway, Ren said. And for the first time since the war began, a Viharn and a human looked at each other and were not enemies. The message from Human High Command arrived 6 hours later, and it wanted the same thing the warlord wanted, which was the single fact about the whole affair that Ren could not make herself stop turning over. Admiral Reyes came through on a priority channel from the Meridian Yards, 4 jumps back toward human space, and he did not waste time being gentle. You're going to hand them over, Ren. To who, sir? To anyone who will take the problem off my desk. Reyes was an old man, gray and square, and he had been the one who pushed her flag through against every officer who thought 29 was 10 years too young for it. He had earned the right to be blunt with her, and he used it. You've turned a wreckfield salvage into an interspecies incident. The Viharn are screaming that we've abducted their young. Half my staff thinks you've compromised the Solace by keeping live enemy assets aboard a flagship, and the other half is scared of what those things grow into. You know what a mature Viharn does to a human boarding team. You've seen the footage, and you're raising 6 of them in your day cabin. They're 2 months old, sir. Right now the most dangerous thing about them is that Cricket chews cable insulation. And in 3 years. Ren was quiet. On the deck at her feet, Bishop and Pepper were engaged in the slow-motion wrestling that passed for their idea of a fair fight, and Ash sat apart from it, watching the channel, watching the strange voice come out of the wall, its low-fire eyes fixed on the screen as though it could hold Reyes accountable through it. In 3 years, Ren said, they're going to be the most loyal thing in this fleet, sir, and they're going to be loyal to us. You want to talk about what a mature Viharn does to a boarding team? I'd rather have 6 of them on my side of the airlock than the enemy's. Wouldn't you? That's not a plan, Admiral. That's a feeling. It's a bond, she said it flatly. Their people have a whole body of law about it. The word is Veloth. It means I'm their blood parent, and it means that when they're grown they'll answer for me before they answer for anything else in the universe. Their own warlord can't override it. That's not a feeling, sir. That's the most binding contract these people have, and I signed it by accident, and I am not tearing it up because it makes your staff nervous." Reyes looked at her a long moment across 4 jumps of space. "You understand I could relieve you." "You could." Ren didn't blink. "And then you'd have to be the human who took 6 orphans away from the only warmth they've ever known and did it to appease the exact enemy that left them to die. That'll play beautifully on every channel, sir. I already showed the galaxy the other version." She let that sit. "I'm not threatening you. I'm telling you what the picture looks like. I sent one out 4 hours before you called. There'll be more." The old man's jaw worked. Then something in his face gave, not agreement, but the grudging recalculation of a commander who has just watched a subordinate outflank him and is professional enough to respect it. "They're your responsibility," Reyes said. "All of it. Whatever they do, whatever they become, whatever this costs, it's yours, Halloran, not the fleet's. Yours." "They've been mine since the wreck field, sir," Ren said. "You're just catching up." The killers came in the deep watch, when the corridors were dim and the great ugly warmth of the solace had settled into the low hum it made in the sleep cycle, and they came the way Viharn came. Silent, in the dark, expecting prey. Ren was asleep on the deck of her day cabin, with all 6 of them on her when Ash woke. She did not hear the killers. No one heard the killers. That was the entire point of them. What Ren heard, dragging her up out of sleep, was Ash. The ash-gray kit came off her chest all at once, and it made the buzzing warding cry, but louder than she had ever heard it and wrong, cracked through with something high and frightened. And in the space of a breath, all 6 of them were awake and off her, and facing the cabin hatch with their backs to her, and their small bodies low. The hatch should have been sealed. It was open. There was a shape in it that had not been there when she went to sleep, and the shape was not human. Later, when she tried to give her account of it, Ren could not put the next 10 seconds into an order that made sense, because they did not happen in an order. They happened all at once. She was on her feet with her back against the bunk. The kits were between her and the hatch, all 6 of them, making a sound she had never heard and would never forget. Not the warding cry any longer, but something under it, older, a sound with no comfort in it at all. The shape in the hatch came forward fast and low, and a blade caught the dim light, and it was coming for her, only for her, exactly as Tsaruk had said it would. And then the lights came up. The kits did not stop the killer. She wanted later to be able to say that they had, that 6 2-month-old orphans had brought down a grown Viharn assassin, because that was the story the fleet wanted and the story that got told anyway. But they were babies and they were small, and what they did was not stop the killer. What they did was refuse to move. They put themselves between the blade and their veil, and they would not break, and a Viharn assassin, trained from the final molt to kill in silence and be gone, found 6 of his own people's kits in warding posture across his target, and he hesitated. For a quarter of a second, no more. The oldest law reached up through 11 years of doctrine and a lifetime of the blade, and closed its hand around him, and he hesitated to cut through Viharn young to reach the thing behind them. A quarter of a second was enough for Idris Vale. Ren never saw the flag captain come through the hatch. She only knew that the killer was there, and then the killer was down, and Idris was standing over him with a sidearm, and 2 of the Solace's Marines were flooding into the cabin behind him, with their rifles up and their faces white. She knew that there had been 3 killers in her ship that night, and that the other 2 never reached her cabin, and that the fleet did not talk afterward about exactly what met them in the dark of the Solace's lower corridors, because the Marines who found what was left did not have words that would go in a report. She knew that no human aboard died that night. And she knew that when it was over she was on her knees on the deck with all 6 kits climbing into her at once, shaking, making the cracked, hopeless sound she had not heard since the wreck field, and that she was making a sound too, and that she said the same thing to them over and over with her face down against Ash's small, shuddering back. "You're staying, you're all staying. Nobody's taking you, you're staying." Tsaruk got the burst signal from Orvo across the gray 40 minutes later, and it was 6 words. "The veil lives, your reckoning comes." He knew what it meant. The assassination had failed, which meant the warlord's clean solution had not been clean, which meant that Draco's was now facing the exact catastrophe he had ordered the killers to prevent. A human admiral who had survived a Viharn strike in her own quarters, defended by Viharn Young, with the whole fleet watching to see what the humans would broadcast next. And it meant that the failure would be laid at Saruk's feet, because Saruk was the shipmaster who had parleyed instead of expunging, who had filed the word Veloth in a report to the warlord's own hand, who had, though Draco's could not prove it, warned the target. "Your reckoning comes." Saruk stood on the command tier of the Skarn V Hale and looked at the crew he had commanded for 6 years. Orvo at signals. Vaelreth at the helm, a war form older than Saruk who had followed him through 4 campaigns. The gunmaster Sek. The whole quiet, competent body of a Viharn war carrier, 91 souls, every one of them raised on the same story he had been raised on. The humans burned the young. He had watched a human keep the young warm with her own body. He had watched 6 kits stand in warding posture across a killer to protect her. He could not unwatch it, and he found, standing on his own command tier with his reckoning coming across the gray, that he did not want to. "Orvo," he said, "how many aboard this ship have kin who fell at a wreck field? A brood mother, a creche sibling, a transport logged lost with all aboard and never boarded again." Orvo turned from her station. She was young. She had been raised harder on the doctrine than Saruk, who at least remembered a Viharn call before the war swallowed everything. But she had seen the feed 4 times on this tier, in the silence that did not fit inside the mind. "Most of us, shipmaster," she said quietly. "It is the war. Everyone has a transport that never came back." "And how many of us were told the humans burned them?" The command tier had gone still. Vaelreth had turned from the helm. Sek had come up from the gun deck to the hatch and stood there, listening. "All of us," Orvo said. Saruk brought up the feed one last time, the human on the cold deck, the blanket drawn higher, the small ash-colored kit asleep against a warmth it had decided to trust. He let it play. He let the whole tier watch it play, the thing they had all seen and none of them had been able to put down. "They did not burn them," Saruk said. "The humans went back into a hull our own doctrine told us to abandon, and they carried out 6 of our young, and they have kept them warm for 2 months at the cost of their own sleep. And tonight those 6 kits stood between a Viharn blade and a human, and would not move. The oldest law of our people is alive tonight on a human warship. It is not alive on this one. It is not alive on the warlord's flag. Draco's ordered the veil killed to break the bond, and the bond did not break, and now he will call it my failure and end me for it." He looked around the tier at the faces of the crew he had led into the black and back out of it, 4 campaigns worth of them, and he asked the only question that mattered. "I am going across to the human ship, not to reclaim, not to expunge, to stand where the law is still alive. I will not order any of you to follow me into that. I am asking, who comes?" For a long moment no one moved, and Saruk understood that he might go alone, and made his peace with it. Then Vaelreth, the old warform who had followed him through 4 campaigns, rose from the helm and crossed the tier, and stood at Saruk's shoulder without a word. Orvo shut down her station. "Someone has to fly the signal so the humans do not shoot us on approach," she said, and stood. Sek, the gun master, came the rest of the way through the hatch. Not all 91 came. 32 chose to stay with the Ascendancy, and Saruk let them go in the shuttles without a shot, because they were not cowards and they were not villains. They were Viharn who could not make the turn he was making, and he would not spend a single life of theirs to punish them for it. But 59 came. 59 Viharn and 1 war carrier turned out of the red and toward the white, and Saruk raised, ahead of them, not a flag of parley this time, but the only signal he had left that the humans might understand. He broadcast it wide, unencrypted, on every warband from the Reach to the Call, so that every V-Harn ship in the theater would find it waiting the way they had found the humans' picture waiting, and so that Draco's, on his flag, would read it and know it had been said where the whole fleet could hear. The Skarn V-Hail comes to the Vale Tsaruk sent. The law is not dead, it only changed hands. A V-Harn war carrier turning toward a human flagship is, from every instrument's point of view, an attack run, and the Solace went to battle stations the instant the Skarn V-Hail came about. Ren stood on her bridge with the kits shut safely 3 decks down under a full marine guard. She had learned that lesson in one night, and watched the red icon of the war carrier close, and listened to her gunnery officer beg her for a firing solution. "Admiral, she's inside our envelope. If she means to ram or launch, we won't have time to." "She's broadcasting," Ren said. "On enemy bands, ma'am, we can't." "Put it up, all of it, now." Ren had spent 19 days learning to read one V-Harn's face and voice, and she gambled everything on that thin thread of knowledge now. The message resolved on her board, translated rough and mechanical. "The Skarn V-Hail comes to the Vale. The law is not dead, it only changed hands." And behind the text, a manifest. 59 V-Harn, 1 war carrier, weapons cold, drives banked, coming in slow and soft as a thing that wants to be let in rather than a thing that means to break down the door. Idris was at her shoulder. It could be a trick, get you to hold fire, close the distance then. It could be. Ren watched the war carrier's drive glow dim further deliberately, a ship baring its throat. Weapons tight. Nobody fires without my word. Open a channel to the shipmaster. Tsaruk's face came up on the main display, and the whole bridge of the Solace saw a living V-Harn shipmaster for the first time, and the whole bridge went silent the way the enemy's command tier had gone silent 19 days before. He filled the screen, plated and vast and terrible, and he lowered his great armored head a fraction, the gesture Ren had seen him make in her own hatchway. The gesture she now understood was not a threat but its opposite. "Vale," Tsaruk said, "I have broken with my warlord. 59 of my crew have broken with him beside me. We come because the law is alive where you are and dead where we came from, and a V-Harn cannot live where the law is dead." He paused. "I know what I am asking. I am asking an enemy to open her door to a war carrier. I have no way to prove I am not a blade. I have only this: you have 6 of my people's young in your hold, and if you let me aboard, I will teach you how to raise them so that they live, and I will stand between them and everything the ascendancy sends until I fall. That is what I have to offer. It is all I have." Ren looked at him a long moment. "Idris thinks it's a trick," she said. "Idris is a wise officer," said Tsaruk. "In his place I would think the same. I have no answer to it except that I could have killed you in your quarters 19 days ago, and instead I warned you. Weigh that as you like." Ren weighed it. She weighed it against 19 days and 1 terrible night, against 6 kits asleep on her chest, and 6 kits standing across a blade, against an old man 4 jumps away telling her it was all her responsibility now, against every rule she had ever been handed about the enemy and the war and who got to be a person in it. "Bring her in slow," Ren said. "Drives banked, guns cold, 1 shuttle at a time, and shipmaster, you come across first and you come across alone and you come to the hold, because they'll tell me whether I can trust you faster than any scan I've got." She almost smiled and did not, because the bridge was watching. "They're better at reading V-Harn than I'll ever be." They read him in about 4 seconds. Tsaruk came into the rebuilt medical bay under a marine escort with his hands open and empty, and 6 kits that had been climbing the walls with 2-month-old energy went still and turned toward him all at once. And then Ash crossed the deck at a dead run and slammed into the V-Harn's ankle and climbed him. It was not the warding cry. It was the other thing, the sound Ren had heard them make only for each other and for her, a rolling burr deep in the chest, and Ash went up the shipmaster's plated leg and body like he was a tree and reached his shoulder and put its small face against the side of that terrible jaw and made the sound directly into him. And Saruk, shipmaster of the Ascendancy, 4 campaigns, a killer in the dark, stood in the middle of a human medical bay with a V-Harn kit against his cheek and closed his low-fire eyes and did not move, because to move would have ended it, and he did not want it to end. "Well," said Idris Vale from the hatch, in the tone of a man watching the last of his objections walk out of the room, "that's that then." The other 5 swarmed him. Saruk lowered himself to the deck with the enormous care of a warform who has learned exactly how fragile the young are, and he let them cover him, and he spoke to them in the V-Harn tongue, low, in words the translation collar did not bother to render, and Ren understood without translation that he was telling them the thing you tell children who have survived something they should not have survived, that they were safe, that he had them, that no one was taking them. She crouched down at the edge of the pile. Ash detached from Saruk long enough to come back to her, checking on her the way it always did, touching its nose to her jaw, and then went back to the shipmaster. And Ren understood that something had just changed in the shape of her small, strange family, and that it had gotten bigger, and that it now included the enemy. "Teach me," she said. "You said you'd teach me how to raise them so they live. Start now. I've been guessing for 19 days. "You have not been guessing," Saruk said. He had Sunday, the smallest, cupped in one clawed hand against his chest, and the kid had fallen asleep there instantly, the way it fell asleep on Ren. "You have been doing, correctly, every single thing our creche masters spend a lifetime learning, and you have done it from nothing, from a book you were never given because you looked at a cold thing and could not leave it cold." He looked at her over the sleeping kit. "There is nothing I can teach you about the warmth veil. That you already have. I can only teach you the rest, what they will need as they grow. How large they become, and how fast and how strong, and what it means to hold the loyalty of a thing that can take a man's arm off without meaning to. That you will need, because they will not stay small." Warlord Draco's Vhenkal did not take the defection of the Skarn Vhale quietly. Saruk had known he would not, and the shape of the warlord's answer told the whole fleet, and eventually the whole Ascendancy, exactly how frightened Draco's had become. He could not admit that a shipmaster had turned for the sake of the oldest law, because to admit it was to admit the law was against him. So he told a different story. He told the fleet that the humans had a weapon, a thing that reached into the V-Harn mind and turned loyal warriors against their own, a poison, a contagion, and that Saruk and his 59 were not defectors but victims, hollowed out and worn like masks by the human enemy. He told them the 6 kits were not being raised but dissected, that the images were fabrications, that the warmth was bait. He told them the humans still burned the young, and that the burning had simply moved somewhere the cameras could not follow. It was a good lie. Saruk, hearing it repeated back across the gray on intercepted bands, felt a cold professional respect for it. It explained the defection without conceding the law. It let a V-Harn who had seen the feed go on hating the humans without having to hate the warlord. It gave the frightened a place to put their fear. The trouble with the lie was the kits. Because the Ascendancy was made of V-Harn, and every V-Harn had, somewhere behind the doctrine, the oldest law in their body, and Saruk did the one thing that a lie about dissection could not survive. He put the kits on camera, not staged, not narrated. He simply let the Solace's feeds run, wide and unencrypted, day after day, and he let the V-Harn fleet watch 6 of their own young grow up on a human warship. They watched Cricket learn to hunt a trailed bootlace and drag it to the human Admiral as tribute. They watched Fen, who had nearly died in the 2nd week, get strong enough to knock Bishop off the top of the blanket pile and stand there crowing about it. They watched the human medical officer, a soft-spoken woman named Akafar, weigh each kit every morning and mark the climbing lines on the bulkhead chart, and they watched those lines climb. They watched the young Admiral fall asleep on the deck under a heap of them, night after night, in a warship named Solace, and they watched a Viharn shipmaster sit up in the dark keeping the watch over both, over the kits and over the human, the way a war form keeps the watch over its own creche. You cannot dissect a thing and also raise it on camera for a season. The lie and the feed could not both be true, and the Viharn fleet had eyes. Saruk did not have to argue with Draco's story. He only had to keep the cameras running. And every day they ran, somewhere in the red, another Viharn crew watched 6 kits fall asleep warm, and remembered a transport that never came back, and did the arithmetic the human Admiral had done in the wreck field, and found that it came out different than the doctrine said. The defections began as a trickle, a scout cutter its crew of 9, then a supply hauler. Then, 3 weeks after the Skarn Vihale turned, a second war carrier, the Vonsaro, under a shipmaster named Gel who had lost a whole brood line at a wreck field 2 years before, and had never stopped grieving it, came out of the red with its guns cold and its drive banked, broadcasting the same 6 words Saruk had broadcast, and Ren Halloran had to find room in her fleet for another 140 Viharn who had decided that the law was alive where she was. "This is becoming a problem I don't have a rank for," Ren told Saruk, standing on the Solace's observation deck watching the Vonsaro ease into formation among the human ships. Down at her feet, 4 of the kits slept in a heap. Ash sat up on the rail beside her hand, watching the new war carrier with the proprietary air it had lately started to take toward the whole fleet. "Command wants to know what I'm building out here. Honestly, sir, so do I." "You are not building anything," Saruk said. "You are keeping something warm. The building is what happens around it." He watched the great dark shape of the Vonsaro settle into place beside the ugly white human hulls, red and white in one formation for the first time in 11 years. "There is a thing I have not told you, Vale, because you have had enough to hold, but you should know it now before this grows past your ability to stop it. Do you know why Draco's is truly afraid? It is not the 6. It is not even the 59 or the 140. It is what the 6 become. You keep saying that. They won't stay small, I get it. You do not yet." Saruk looked down at Ash on the rail, the ash-gray kit that had lifted its head off a frozen floor and decided to live. "In 3 of your years, that one will stand as tall as I do. In 4, taller. It will have the strength to open a war carrier's hull with its hands, and the speed to cross a room before a human can raise a weapon, and the whole of the oldest law will run in it like blood, and every particle of that loyalty, that lethality, that unbreakable devotion, will be pointed at you." He was quiet a moment. "Draco's has spent 11 years trying to build a weapon that will make the humans afraid. And a human admiral, by refusing to let 6 babies freeze, is raising the only thing in the galaxy that will make the Viharn afraid of what it means to threaten her. That is why he is afraid, not of what you have, of what you are growing." The hardest thing about the first months was not the Viharn. It was the humans who had to learn to sleep in a ship that now held them. Ren understood the fear. She would have been a fool not to. Every human aboard the Solace had grown up on the same story the Viharn had, only pointed the other way. The Viharn come in the dark, silent, for your throat, and no broadcast and no law and no shipmaster lowering his great head could unmake in a season what 11 years of the war had built into a body. There were crew who could not walk a corridor if a defector war form was in it. There were crew who requested transfers. Ren approved every one of them without comment, because a person who could not do the thing should not be shamed for it, and because the ones who stayed had to stay freely or the whole fragile thing came apart. The turn, when it came, did not come from a speech. It came from the gun master Sek and a 19-year-old human rating named Pell. Pell had lost a brother to the Viharn 2 years before the wreck field, and he made no secret of what he thought of having them aboard, and Ren kept him on because he did his work and kept his hate to himself, which was all she required of anyone. Then a coolant line let go on the gun deck, the ordinary murderous small disasters of an old warship, and Pell was under it when it went, pinned, scalding, and the nearest hands were Viharn. Sek did not hesitate over whether the human under the failing line was worth a Viharn's risk. Sek had spent 11 years killing humans and would have killed Pell without a thought 2 years before, and now Sek went into the venting coolant with his own plating for a shield, and pulled a 19-year-old human boy out from under a weight that would have crushed a man, and held him, scalded and shaking, and made. Because it was the only comfort Sek had, because it was what the frontier had taught even the hardest of them. The safe sound, the burr, the "you are kept." Into a terrified human child who had every reason in the world to hate him, and in that moment only clung to him and let himself be kept. Pell requested no transfer after that. Pell, in fact, became one of the first humans to learn enough of the Viharn tongue to speak it without the collar, and years later, when the frontier held its sittings down, it was Pell, gray by then himself, who taught the young human keepers how to sound the warm tone, and who told them, when they asked how a human had come to know a Viharn right so deeply, that a Viharn had once pulled him out of the cold when he had done nothing to earn it, and that he had spent the rest of his life trying to be worth it. "That's how it goes every time," Ren told Saruk, watching Pell and Sek share the gun deck watch a month later as though the coolant line had rewritten something permanent between them. Nobody's argued into it. You can't argue anybody into it. Somebody just gets kept when they don't expect it, and after that they can't go back to how they thought before. That's the whole mechanism. That's all it ever is. "It is how you got me," Saruk said. "I know," said Ren. "I've known since the hold. You came to take them and Ash climbed you and made the sound and you closed your eyes and didn't move. You got kept, shipmaster, same as everybody. You just had further to come than most." Saruk did not deny it. Below them, on the gun deck, a Viharn who had killed humans for 11 years and a human who had hated Viharn for 2 stood a shared watch in comfortable silence, and one small kit that had wandered down from the creche where it did not belong sat between them, and neither of them made it leave. And that, more than the platform, more than the fleet coming apart in the thaw, more than any of the great turnings the songs would later name, was the war ending, one kept thing at a time. In the warm, ugly belly of a ship named Solace, the thing the defectors began to call the kept warmth started, as most doctrine does, by accident. Ren had a habit. Every night before the pile of them settled onto her to sleep, she took each kid in turn and wrapped it once, snug in its own square of silver thermal blanket, a swaddle tucked under the chin, so that for a moment each of the 6 was a warm bundle with only its face showing, and she said a small thing to each one as she did it. The same 6 small things every night. Nonsense, really, you're safe. That's you, in you go. And only then did she let them out of the wrapping to climb onto her however they liked. She did not know why she did it. She had started it in the first week when they were still fragile and cold-prone, and she had simply never stopped because they had come to expect it, and a kit that had not been wrapped would not settle. Saruk watched her do it for the first time on the 3rd night after he came across, and he went very still, and then he left the medical bay without a word, and Ren thought she had done something wrong. She had not. She found out what she had done the next morning, when she came onto the observation deck, and found 40 of the defector Viharn grown war forms, 4 campaigns of blood among them, standing in silence while old Veilreth wrapped a scrap of thermal cloth once, snug, around the shoulders of a scout cutter crewman who had lost his whole brood line at a wreck field, and said a small thing to him that the translation collar rendered as "you are kept." "What is this?" Ren said quietly to Saruk, who stood at the edge of it. "You made a right," Saruk said. "You did not mean to. You never mean to, that is why it works." He watched Veilreth move to the next crewman. "Among us, when a broodmother took an orphan through its first winter, there was a wrapping, the same wrapping you do, near enough that when I saw you do it I could not breathe. We lost it. The war took it, the way the war took the naming and the going back and everything else that cost time we told ourselves we could not spend. We stopped wrapping our orphans because we stopped keeping them. And then a human who had never heard of us or our winters sat down in a wreck and wrapped 6 of our young in silver and told them they were safe, because it was the obvious thing to do. His low-fire eyes moved over the assembled Viharn, the hard killers standing in line to be wrapped like kits. They are not being made children again. They are remembering that they were once kept. Most of them have not been kept since their own first winter. Some of them never were. You gave it back to us, Vale. We are calling it the kept warmth. Wren did not know what to say to that, so she did what she always did, which was the next small, ordinary thing. She went and got a fresh square of thermal cloth, and she came and stood beside Vale-Reth, and she wrapped the next Viharn in line herself, a scarred warform twice her height who had to lower himself onto the deck so she could reach his shoulders, and she said the small thing she said to the kits, and the warform put his great head down and made the bird deep in his chest that she had thought only the kits could make, and 40 grown Viharn watched a human keep one of their own warm. And something in the long grief of the war moved and eased. Idris Vale, who had come up to find her, stood in the hatch and watched, and when she came back to him he said only, in a rough voice, "My grandmother used to tuck me in like that, right up under the chin." I'm 61 and I still remember the exact words she said. He cleared his throat. It's the same everywhere then. Warm things. It's the same all the way down. It's the same all the way down, Wren said. They passed their first winter 40 days later, and Saruk asked her to let him mark it. They have survived the season, he said. By our reckoning they are past the threshold now. They will live. Among us this is the day the naming would happen, the day the brood mother spends the debt she would not spend early and gives the name she has been holding back. He hesitated, and Wren understood that a Viharn shipmaster asking a human admiral for something did not come easily to him. You have already named them. You named them in the first week before you knew any of this, and I confess it frightened me when you did it, because to name a kit before it's winter is to dare the cold to take it. But the cold did not take them. You dared it and you won. He inclined his great head. I would like the defectors to see the naming done. Not to change the names are yours and they are good names, human names, and the kits know them, but to mark the day. To spend the debt in the open, so that every Viharn who has watched them grow can see a thing done right that we stopped doing when the war took us. So they did it in the Solace's largest hold, with the human crew along one bulkhead and the defector Viharn along the other and the 6 kits. No longer so small, waist-high now on Wren, all knees and oversized paws and the first hard buds of the plating that would one day armor them, arranged in the middle, and Wren stood before each in turn, and said its name aloud to the assembled fleet, and the Viharn answered each name with a single low note, all 200 of them. A sound Wren felt in the deck through her boots. Ash, she said, and 200 Viharn answered. Cricket, Bishop, Pepper. Fen, each name, each answer, the sound rolling around the hold. Sunday, she said last, and put her hand on the head of the smallest, the one they had found nearly gone 2 decks down, and 200 Viharn answered so deep that the warmth lamps trembled in their fittings. Ash came and leaned its growing weight against her, the way it had leaned on her shin in the first week, except that now its shoulder came to her hip and its head to her ribs, and it made the burr, and Wren stood in a hold full of the enemy who were not the enemy any more, and understood that she had, without ever deciding to, become the center of something she did not have a rank for and never would. There is a thing brood mothers say, Saruk told her quietly, on the naming day. When the debt is spent and the names are given, it is the oldest blessing we have. He said it in the Viharn tongue first, and then let the collar render it. You dared the cold and it did not take them, now dare the world. That's a lot to put on a person, Wren said. Yes, said Saruk. It is meant to be. You have raised warriors, Vale. That was always what they were going to be. The only thing you have changed is whose they are and what they will not do, and that is everything. He watched the 6 of them mob her, knocking her half off her feet with an affection that had grown as dangerous as it was gentle. You have raised 6 Viharn who will never leave a cold thing in a wreck. Dracos has raised a fleet who will. When they meet, and they will meet Vale, he cannot let this stand. The galaxy will get to see which raising holds. Dracos let it stand for a year, and Saruk knew exactly why, and it was not mercy. It was arithmetic. The warlord understood, as Saruk understood, that 6 kits in their first year were a symbol and no more. That whatever the law said, 6 waist-high juveniles could not defend a human fleet against the massed weight of the ascendancy. To strike now was to strike while the symbol was still only a symbol, and to make martyrs of 6 young the whole fleet had watched grow up, and to prove the human broadcast right in front of every Viharn who had wavered. Better to wait. Better to let the humans and their poisoned defectors gather in one place, out on the frontier, and grow comfortable, and grow numerous, and then to come with a weight that could not be answered and end all of it in one blow. The veil, the brood, the defectors, the law, and the story, all at once, so cleanly and so completely that no camera survived to broadcast it. So Dracos built his armada in the deep red, and he let the year pass, and across the frontier the strange mixed thing that had gathered around a human admiral, and 6 kits went on gathering. More defectors came. A creche master named Senna came out of the red with a hauler full of 40 orphans she had refused to abandon. Real orphans. Kits from 3 broken transports, gathered up and hidden and fed on a hauler's short rations while she waited to find somewhere the law was still alive. And when she heard the humans broadcast, she brought them all to the frontier and put them into Ren Halloran's arms because there was nowhere else in the galaxy to put them anymore. 46 kits then 60, as the frontier crews began going back into the wreck fields the way the human had, boarding the hulls the doctrine said to abandon, carrying out the cold young the ascendancy had written off. The thing Ren had done alone in one wreck, a fleet began to do everywhere because she had shown them it could be done, and because Saruk had given the doing a name. They went back for them. That became the whole difference between the 2 Viharn fleets, the one in the red and the one on the frontier, and everyone on both sides knew it. The ascendancy did not go back for its young. The frontier did. And the 6 grew. By the end of that year, Ash stood level with Ren's shoulder and could no longer sleep on her chest, though it tried. And the trying had become a thing the whole fleet found dangerous and dear in equal measure. 300 pounds of adolescent apex predator attempting, every night, to be a small thing curled against its veil, and Ren letting it, because she had promised it in a wreck that no one would take it, and she was not about to be the one who did. The plating had come in along its arms and jaw, dark and banded like Saruk's. Its low-fire eyes had gone from the soft glow of a kit's to the steady burn of a war form's. When it walked into a room, the defector Viharn made way, not from fear, but from the recognition of a thing that every one of them could feel and none of them could argue with. That this one, raised warm from the cold by a human who dared the world, was becoming the truest Viharn any of them had ever seen, and that when the day came, as it was coming, it would stand between its veil and the whole weight of the ascendancy, and it would not move, and neither would the 5 beside it, and neither, by then, would 60 more behind them. 3 years after the wreck field, Ash stood a full head taller than Saruk, and when it walked the corridors of the frontier station the deck plates rang, and it still tried to sleep against its veil at night, and Ren Halloran still let it. She was 32 now. She did not look much older. The frontier aged people in the eyes more than the face. But she commanded a thing that had no name in any human table of organization. A mixed enclave of 11 human ships and 19 Viharn hulls, 40,000 souls of 2 species, a working shipyard, a creche that held 91 growing kits and their keepers, and at the center of all of it, 6 warforms who had been the first, who went where she went, who slept in a heap around her quarters every night, and who had become, without anyone quite deciding it, the thing that made the whole enclave possible. The defector Viharn followed Ren because they followed the 6. The humans trusted the Viharn because they trusted the 6. And the six trusted no one and nothing in the universe, more than the small, ordinary woman who had gone back into a cold hull for them, when the doctrine of their own kind said to leave them to freeze. They were not tame. That was the thing visitors from human command could never get comfortable with. Ash was not a large, loyal animal. Ash was a person, grave, watchful, terrifyingly intelligent, with the whole of the oldest law running in it like blood, and it had chosen, freely and completely, to spend that formidable self in the service of one human life. When a supply delegation from the Meridian Yards flinched every time Ash entered a room, Wren stopped explaining. There was no explaining it. You either understood what it meant that a thing that could open a hull with its hands chose, every single day, to be gentle, or you didn't. And if you didn't, no words would help. Sarek had aged in those 3 years, slower than a human but visibly, the plating along his jaw gone pale at the edges. He stood beside Wren on the station's command deck the morning the Armada's ultimatum arrived, and he did not need the translation to run before he knew what it would say. "He has finished building," Sarek said. "It is time." Draco's broadcast the ultimatum the way Sarek had taught the whole theater to broadcast, wide, unencrypted on every band, because the warlord had learned at last and too late that the war was not being fought with ships. It was being fought with pictures, and he meant to make the last picture his. His face filled every screen on the frontier, vast and old and armored, a war form who had held the ascendancy through 11 years of a war he was losing in the only way that mattered. "To the human called Halloran," Draco said, "and to the traitor broods that shelter with her, you have taken our young and called it warmth. You have taken our warriors and called it law. You have taken the oldest word of my people and worn it like a stolen skin. This ends. I am coming to the frontier with the massed weight of the ascendancy, and I am giving you the one mercy the law still allows. Surrender the veil Halloran to ascendancy justice, and the broods will be received back into the fold, and the defectors pardoned, and no world will burn. Refuse, and I will scour the frontier to the last hull, and the young will die with the old, and the galaxy will learn what it costs to steal from the Viharn. You have 10 days. The law is not a human thing. It was never yours to hold." The broadcast ended. The frontier station's command deck was silent. "He's offering to take just you," Idris Vale said at last, very quietly. "You understand what he's doing. He's separating you from them in front of the whole fleet. He's betting the humans will do the arithmetic he does that one Admiral is a cheap price for 40,000 lives, and a war we're tired of, and a brood we can keep. He's betting your own people will hand you over." "I know what he's doing," Wren said. "Command's going to call within the hour, and they're going to ask you to consider it." "I know that too." They called within the hour. It was Ray's, older and grayer than 3 years ago, and he looked like a man who had already lost the fight he was about to have with her. "Wren," he said, "I'm not going to insult you by pretending I'm not under pressure to bring you in. The assembly's been in session all night. Half of them want to hand you to the Viharn on a platter and call it the end of the war. The other half know that if we do that, we're exactly the thing the Viharn always said we were, and every one of those defectors goes back to hating us, and the war starts again in a decade with them on the other side." He rubbed his face. "I pushed your flag through when you were 29 against everyone. I'm too old to stop believing I was right, so I'm not going to order you in. But I'm going to ask you the only question that matters, and I need the true answer, not the brave one. Can you win? Because if you can't, then handing you over saves 40,000 lives, and I have to weigh that, and so do you." Wren was quiet a moment. At her feet, Ash lay with its great head down, low-fire eyes half-closed, listening to the strange voice from human space the way it had listened as a kid, the way it had never once stopped listening, because it did not miss anything that touched its veil. She put her hand on the broad plaited crown of its head, and it leaned into her palm, 3 years and 1,000 pounds from the cold thing she had pulled out of a wreck, and she felt the whole weight of what she had raised. "I don't have to win, sir," Wren said. That's the part Dracos doesn't understand, and the part I'm not sure you do either. He thinks this is a battle. It isn't. He's bringing an armada to a frontier full of Viharn who defected specifically because he leaves his young to die, and he's telling them on every band that he's come to take a Vale and her brood by force. Every crew in that armada was raised on the oldest law. Every one of them has a transport that never came back. He's going to order them to break the Veloth in front of the whole fleet. She looked down at Ash. I don't have to beat his armada, sir. I just have to make sure the whole galaxy is watching when he tells it to do the one thing no Viharn can do and still call itself Viharn. Keep the cameras running. That's the only order I'm giving. Keep them running and let them all watch. Reyes looked at her, a long moment across all that space. You really were worth pushing through, he said. Hold the frontier, Admiral. I'll hold the assembly as long as I can. And then, because he was an old man who had spent his life in a war and knew what it cost. For what it's worth, I've watched those feeds too. All of us have. You gave us something to feel besides tired. Don't lose. The warden came on the 8th day, ahead of the armada, alone, and Saruk went to his knees when the ancient Viharn came aboard, which Ren had never once seen him do. There is an order older than the ascendancy, Saruk had told her the night before, when the single small craft had requested approach under a signal so old, the station's Viharn systems almost failed to recognize it. Older than the warlords, the wardens of the first cold. They keep the law, the true law, the winters and the wrappings and the Veloth, and they judge its claims, and they answer to no fleet and no warlord. Draco suppressed them. He could not abolish them, no warlord can, but he starved them, closed their halls, sent their witnesses to the front to die. I thought there were none left. He had looked at the approaching craft with something Ren had never seen in him. Oh, there is one left, and it is coming here. Do you understand what that means, Vale? Dracos forced the question of your Veloth into the open before the whole fleet. He meant it as an accusation. But once the question is asked in the open, the law requires that a warden answer it. He has summoned the very thing he spent 11 years burying. He was so certain no warden remained to come. The warden was old beyond Ren's ability to read, its plating gone entirely pale, its movements slow, its low-fire eyes dimmed to embers, and it came aboard leaning on a staff of black Viharn iron, and it looked at the human admiral for a long time before it spoke. I have come a great distance, the warden said, to see the thing the warlord calls a theft and the traitor fleets call a keeping. I have come to judge whether the Veloth is real, or whether a human has draped herself in a word she cannot fill. Its dimmed eyes moved to Ash, standing at Ren's shoulder, and then to the 6 behind it, and then out through the viewport to the 19 defector hulls and the creche that held 91 growing young. The law does not care what you are, human. It never did. It cares only for the cold and the warmth, and whether the warmth was true. Show me, not with words. Words are what warlords use. Show me the thing itself, and I will tell the fleet and the warlord and the ancestors whether the oldest law lives in you or whether you are a liar wearing our grief. It planted its iron staff on the deck. You have until the armada comes. Show me, Vale, if that is what you are. Ren did not know how to show the warden a thing that was not a performance, so she did the only honest thing she could think of, which was to stop trying, and simply let the old Viharn follow her through an ordinary day. The warden watched her wake, which she did the way she woke every morning, under a heap of war forms, unable to move, Ash's great head pinning one of her legs and Sunday's across her chest, and the others in a warm plaited tangle that would have crushed a careless human, and never once in 3 years had so much as bruised her. It watched them wake as she woke, each of them checking her before it checked anything else in the universe. 6 enormous predators surfacing out of sleep with their first thought, every single morning, being where is she warm, is she safe? The warden watched her go to the creche, where 91 growing kits swarmed her, and where she knew every name. She had made herself learn every name, all 91, because Tsaruk had told her once that a Viharn who does not know a kit's name has not truly kept it, and it watched her wrap the 3 newest arrivals in silver cloth herself, snug under the chin, and say the small thing she said. Because they were new and frightened, and had not yet learned that the frontier was a place where the cold did not win. The warden watched the human medical officer, HFY, gray now at the temples, teach a class of young Viharn keepers how to read the early signs of the grief fever, human and Viharn side by side over a diagram, and it watched a defector warform correct the human gently on a point of Viharn anatomy, and the human thank him, and both of them go on. It watched the wrapping line on the observation deck, where any Viharn who needed it, and many did always forever, because the war had left a cold in all of them that one keeping did not cure, could come and be wrapped and told they were kept. It watched Idris Vale, 64 now, sit on the deck of the creche with a kid asleep in the crook of his arm, humming something his grandmother had hummed, and it watched 3 young Viharn keepers lean in to learn the human sound. It watched, and it said nothing, for a day and most of another, and Wren began to think that perhaps there was nothing she could show it, that perhaps the law needed a Viharn to fill it after all, that perhaps she was exactly the liar wearing their grief that Dracos said she was. And then the hull breached, and the warden saw the thing itself. It was not sabotage, though for one bad hour everyone assumed it was. It was the frontier. A micrometeoroid swarmed the station's old Viharn sensors misjudged. A section of the creche ring holed in 3 places at once, decompression alarms, the particular hell of a hull failure in a place full of the young. Wren was in the creche ring when it happened, and so the first thing that happened, before the alarms had finished their first cycle, before any human or Viharn on the command deck had understood what was breaching, was that Ash knew. It was 6 compartments away. It should not have been able to know. But it came through those 6 compartments faster than the alarm propagated, faster than Wren had ever seen it move. 1,000 pounds of war form at a dead run through a station full of people, it did not so much as brush, and it reached the hold compartment in the half-second before the pressure door would have sealed, and it did not go to the breach. It went to her. It put its own armored body between Wren Halloran and the venting hull, wrapped her against its chest with the whole shelter of itself the way she had once wrapped it in silver, and it held her there, plated back to the screaming cold, while the emergency systems fought the pressure and the other 5 flooded into the compartment behind it and made a wall of themselves around the kits, around the keepers, around every warm living thing in that ring, and held. No one died, the pressure doors won, the breach sealed. It was over in 90 seconds, and it was the longest 90 seconds of Wren's life, held against Ash's chest in the cold, feeling the great body around her flinch and hold as the frost took its unprotected plating, hearing it make, into the top of her head, where she could feel it more than hear it, the burr, the safe sound, the you're kept sound, the sound she had spent 3 years teaching it, and it had spent 90 seconds giving back to her while it shielded her with its own body from the vacuum. When the compartment repressurized and the light came back, Wren was on her knees on the deck with Ash curled around her, and the warden of the first cold was standing in the hatchway where it had come at its own slow pace to see what the alarms meant, leaning on its black iron staff, and its dimmed ember eyes were fixed on the war form that had wrapped a human in itself against the cold. The warden crossed the compartment. It stopped before Ash, and Ash lifted its head from around its veil, the plating along its back scored pale with frostburn, favoring one shoulder where the cold had bitten deepest, and it did not move away from Wren, and it did not lower its head to the warden, because in that moment nothing in the universe outranked the small human it was curled around. "Show me you're hurt," the warden said. Ash did not. "It will not leave me long enough for the medics to see it," Wren said. Her voice came out rough. "It's been like this since it was 2 months old. It gets between me and the thing. It doesn't care what the thing is. A blade, a warlord, a hull breach. It doesn't care." She put her hand against the scored, frost-pale plating of its back, and it leaned into her palm, and even hurt, even frost-burned, it made the burr. "I didn't teach it this. I want you to understand that, whatever you decide about me, I taught it that it was safe. I never taught it to do this. It taught itself. The first time was when it was small enough to sleep on my chest, and there was a killer in my quarters, and 6 babies got between him and me and would not move. I didn't teach that either. It's what they are. It's what they were always going to be. All I ever did was decide whose. The warden of the first cold stood a long time in the repressurized compartment, looking at the human on her knees and the frost-burned war form curled around her that would not leave her side to be healed, and at the 5 others still standing their wall around the creche, though the danger was past, because the danger being past did not yet mean, to them, that she was safe. Then the ancient Viharn did a thing that made every defector in the compartment go still. It lowered itself, slowly, painfully, old plating grinding, down onto the deck before the human Admiral, a warden of the first cold, who answered to no warlord and no fleet, going to the deck before a human, and it reached out with one pale-clawed hand and laid it very lightly on the scored back of the war form she had raised, over the frostburn, in the old gesture of a keeper acknowledging a keeping. I have judged Valoth for 400 years, the warden said. I have seen broodmothers die for their orphans and orphans die for their broodmothers. I have seen the bond true and I have seen it counterfeit, and I have never once in 400 years been uncertain which I was looking at. Its ember eyes came up to Ren's face. I am not uncertain now. This is the truest keeping I have witnessed in my life, and it was done by a thing that is not Viharn, who had never heard our law, who filled it to the last drop before she knew its name. It rose with great effort and planted its iron staff, and its voice, when it came again, was pitched to carry, not to the compartment but through it, to the recorders, to the fleet, to the coming armada, to the warlord in the red. Let the ascendancy hear the judgment of the first cold. The human Ren Halloran is Vale. The bond is real. It is the oldest law alive, more alive in her than in any hall the warlords ever starved. And any Viharn who raises a hand against her raises it against the law that made us, and will answer to the first cold, and to every ancestor who ever survived a winter, and to the young themselves. It looked at ash, curled and frost-burned and unmovable around its human. Though I think, the warden said, very dry, the young will answer first. The armada came out of the deep red on the 10th day, and it filled the frontier's sky with more Viharn hulls than Ren had ever seen in one place. And against it, the mixed fleet she commanded looked like what it was, which was too small. She stood on the command deck of the Solace. She had moved her flag back to the old ship for this, because it was the ship the picture had come from, and she wanted Dracos to have to look at it. And she watched the red icons resolve and multiply and keep multiplying. And beside her Tsaruk read the count off the tactical well in a flat voice, and the count was bad. He has brought everything, Tsaruk said. Every hull the ascendancy could crew. He means this to be the end, and by the arithmetic of ships it is. We cannot fight that and hold the frontier. If it comes to guns, we lose and the creche loses with us. Then it doesn't come to guns, Ren said. She had spent 10 days deciding how she would do this, and she had come back, in the end, to the only weapon that had ever worked in this whole strange war, which was not a weapon at all. She keyed a channel wide, unencrypted, every band the way she had sent the very first picture, and she did not hail Dracos privately, ship to ship, where he could refuse her and no one would see. She hailed him in the open, in front of both fleets and the frontier and every recorder running, so that whatever he said next, he said it to everyone. Warlord Dracos, Ren said. I'm Admiral Ren Halloran. You came a long way to talk to me, so let's talk where everyone can hear it. You've heard the judgment of the warden of the first cold. Your own law, your oldest law, older than your crown, has looked at what I did and ruled it true. I'm Vale. The bond is real. Your warden said so in front of your whole fleet. She paused. So here's what I'm offering. Come to the line. No guns. Bring your warden's judgment and I'll bring mine, and we'll settle this the way your own law says it has to be settled, in the open, with a warden as witness in front of everyone. If your law's on your side, prove it. If it isn't, then you already know what you're really asking your fleet to do, and so do they. For a long moment there was nothing. Then Draco's face came up on every screen, and Ren saw, in the set of that ancient armored jaw, that she had guessed him right, that he could not refuse a parley he had demanded be public, could not decline to face the law in front of the fleet he had summoned to enforce it, without becoming, in that instant, the thing he had spent 3 years calling her, a liar wearing the law like a stolen skin. "I will come to the line," Draco said, "and I will show your traitors and mine what the law truly says when a warlord speaks it, and not a starved old relic and a human thief. Bring your warden, human. I will bring the truth." They met at the line in the black, on a neutral platform slung between the two fleets, under the eyes of every recorder in the theater, and Ren Halloran walked out onto it with no weapon and no armor and one war form at her shoulder, and Draco's vehicle came out to meet her flanked by 6 of his own elite, and the warden of the first cold stood between them on its black iron staff, and the whole galaxy watched. Draco's was vast, older than Saruk, older than the warden almost, his plating scarred with 11 years of the war he had made. He looked at the small human across the platform, and then at the war form beside her, at Ash, its back still pale with the healing frost burn, standing grave and enormous and utterly still. And Ren watched him do the arithmetic she had watched everyone do, and watched it come out the way it always came out, in the eyes, in the recognition he could not suppress. "You," Draco said to Ash, "were a kid of the Sethon brood, logged lost at the Ninefold Reach. I signed the order that abandoned your transport." He said it as a warlord says a thing meant to wound. "This human did not save you. She collected you. You are a trophy she raised to shame me. When she is gone you will be nothing again, an orphan of a war, with no brood and no name." Ash looked at the warlord for a long moment, and then it did a thing no one had told it to do, a thing Ren herself did not expect. It spoke. Its voice through the translation collar the humans had made it was deep as a war carrier's engines, and slow with the care of a thing that had learned language warm. "I have a name," Ash said. "She gave it to me before she knew your law when I was small enough to die, because she did not do the arithmetic you did. You signed the order that left me in the cold. She took off her helmet in a dead ship, which her own law forbade, and she picked me up, and I stopped being cold." Its low-fire eyes did not leave the warlord. "You are right that I am an orphan of your war. Every Viharn in both these fleets is an orphan of your war. The difference between your fleet and hers is not the ships. It is that when your young fall into the cold, you sign the order and move on, and when ours fall into the cold, we go back. She taught us to go back. That is the whole of it, warlord. That is the thing you brought an armada to kill. The going back." The platform was silent. Across 2 fleets, 40,000 humans and 30,000 Viharn heard a war form the warlord had abandoned as an infant tell him, in the open, what the war had been about, and the warlord had no answer because there was no answer because the war form was right. So Draco's did the only thing left to a warlord who has lost the argument. He reached for the strength he had brought instead. "Enough," Draco said. "The law is what the ascendancy says it is. A human cannot be veil. The word is ours, the young are ours, and I will not have the crown of the Viharn ruled by a starved relic and an animal that learned to talk." He turned his great head, not to Ren, but out toward his own armada, toward the massed red weight of every hull the ascendancy could crew, and he gave the order in the open, in front of everyone, exactly as Ren Halloran had spent 10 days praying he would. "Take her," Draco said to his fleet. "Take the veil, break the bond. This is the word of your warlord." And the warden of the first cold lifted its black iron staff, and struck it once against the platform, and the sound of it carried on every band. "And this," the warden said, "is the word of the first cold. Any Viharn who raises a hand against a true veil breaks the oldest law and is cast out of every winter and will be answered by the young. The judgment is given. The bond is real. Choose, children of the ascendancy, your warlord or your law. You cannot keep both tonight. Saruk watched it happen from the command deck of the Solace, and he would try, for the rest of his life, to describe to those who had not been there what it was like to watch a fleet choose, and he would never quite manage it. It did not happen all at once. For a terrible moment after Dracos gave the order, nothing happened at all, and Saruk's heart went cold, because he knew his people, knew the weight of a warlord's word, knew that discipline could carry a Vharn crew through things the oldest law forbade. He watched the Armada's weapons come live. He watched targeting solutions bloom across the tactical well, red on the small Whitandred cluster of the frontier fleet, on the Solace, on the platform where a small human stood with no armor and one war form at her side. He watched 30,000 Vharn stand at the edge of the thing their warlord had ordered, and for a moment, one long moment, he thought they would do it. Then a single hull in the Armada's second rank went dark. Not destroyed, dark. Its weapons powered down, its running lights dimmed, a war carrier taking itself out of the order of battle in the only language a ship has, and across its hull, in the old script, it ran a signal 3 years old and 6 words long. The Skarn V Hail comes to the Vale. Someone in that crew had kept it, had carried Saruk's words for 3 years, waiting, and now sent them back into the dark for the whole fleet to read. And then the fleet came apart. It came apart the way ice comes apart in a thaw, slow, and then all at once, a crack becoming a fracture becoming a collapse. A cutter went dark, a hauler, a whole squadron of the third rank powered down together, as if they had already decided among themselves and only needed the first one to be brave. War carriers, the great cruel hulls of the ascendancy, dimmed their lights and stood down their guns and ran the 6 words on their flanks, one after another, until half the Armada Dracos had brought to end the frontier hung dark and silent in the black, refusing, not defecting. Not yet, simply refusing, in the oldest and most absolute way a Vharn crew could refuse, to raise a hand against a true Vale. They had all seen the feeds. Every crew in that Armada had spent 3 years watching 6 kits grow up warm on a human ship, and had a transport that never came back, and had done the arithmetic, and now their warlord had ordered them in the open in front of the ancestors and the warden and the young, to do the one thing the oldest law forbade, and rank by rank, hull by hull, they would not. "He's lost them," Wren said quietly on the platform, watching the great red weight above her go dark. She had not moved. She had stood exactly where she was through all of it, small and unarmored and calm with Ash at her shoulder, and she had let the fleet choose without her because it had to be their choosing and not her plea. "Saruk, do you see it? He brought everything, and he's losing them. And he's going to understand in about 10 seconds that the only Vharn in the galaxy who will still follow him are the ones who never had a transport to lose." But Dracos on the platform was not looking at his fleet. He was looking at Wren, and Saruk, watching through the recorders, saw the exact moment the warlord understood that he had lost the fleet, the law, the argument, and the war, and decided that there was one thing left he could still do, one order that needed no fleet to carry out, one blow that would break the bond even now. Kill the Vale, and the bond dies with her. Dracos was 3 strides from her. He had 6 elite at his back and a human with no armor in front of him, and he was a war form of 11 campaigns, and the platform was small. He moved. Wren Halloran saw the warlord come, and she did not move, and afterward the recordings would show that she did not move, that she stood on the platform with her hands empty and her face calm, while 11 campaigns of armored death crossed 3 strides of deck toward her, and the whole galaxy would ask each other how a small, unarmed human could stand so still with that coming at her. The answer was simple, and it was the answer to everything, and Wren knew it the way she knew her own name. She did not move because she was not, and had not been for 3 years, alone. She said one thing. She said it quietly, not to Dracos, because Draco's was already past the reach of anything a human voice could do, and not as a command, because she had never once commanded them and was not going to start at the end. She said it the way she had said it in a wreck field to a cold thing that had stopped believing anyone was coming. "Easy," Ren said. "I'm all right, I've got you." It was not for herself. She was telling them she was all right so that they would not be afraid. That was the last thing the recordings caught clearly before the moment became too fast for any human eye or any human camera to hold. A small woman, with a warlord one stride away, taking the time to tell her children not to be afraid. Then the platform came apart around her, and Saruk, watching, could not have said exactly what he saw, because it did not happen at a speed the mind kept. He saw Ash move. He saw the other 5, who had not been on the platform, who had been held back at the edge of it under Ren's own order, who had waited 3 strides of a warlord's charge with a restraint that must have cost them everything they were. He saw them cross the distance the way water crosses a broken dam. He saw the warlord's 6 elite, the hardest killers of the Ascendancy, take one look at what was coming to answer for a veil and make the only choice the oldest law left them, which was to go down flat to the deck, jaws to the plating, throats bared. In the posture no Viharn had ever been known to hold before a foe, the posture of yielding, of "we will not defend a veil breaker, do not spend yourselves on us." And then Saruk looked away, and made himself look away, and ordered the recorders on the Solace turned from the platform, because some things the galaxy did not need to watch, and because the 6 had earned the dignity of doing what they did without an audience, and because he had raised those 6 himself alongside a human, from kits, and he did not want to see them have to be what the war had always meant them to be. He had spent 3 years watching them be gentle. He would not watch the one time they could not afford to be. When he looked back, it was over. Draco's Vihenkal was alive. That surprised everyone later, and it was the truest measure of the thing Ren Halloran had built, because 6 war forms answering a threat to their veil had every right under their own law to end it, and they had not. They had stopped. They had stopped because, in the last half-second before the platform came apart, over the top of the charge and the fear and 3 years of restraint, a small human voice had said, "Easy, I'm all right. I've got you," and 6 war forms who had been told, every night for 3 years in a wrapping of silver cloth, that they were safe and kept and did not have to be afraid, heard their veil tell them she was all right, and it reached the place in them that was older than the law, older than the war, older than the cold itself. They did not need to kill the warlord. Their veil had told them she was all right, so they had simply taken him down and held him, all his 11 campaigns pinned to the deck under the weight of the young he had abandoned, and they had waited, quivering, for her to tell them what she wanted, because that was the whole of what she had ever taught them, that the answer to the cold was not more cold, it was going back, it was keeping, it was the warm hand instead of the closed one. Ren walked over to where they held him. She was shaking. The recordings that came later showed that she was shaking, that she had been afraid after all, deeply, humanly afraid, and had stood still through it anyway. And she put her hand on Ash's frost-scarred back, and the 6 of them eased a fraction at her touch. She looked down at the warlord of the Viharn, pinned under the young he had left to die. "I'm not going to let them kill you," Ren said. "Not because you don't deserve it, because they don't. They're not what you made your fleet into, and I'm not going to make them into it now at the end to give you the death you'd rather have than the one that's coming." She crouched so he could see her face, small and plain and tired and unafraid. "You could have gone back for them, Dracos. That was the whole thing. That was all it ever was. You had a transport full of your own young in a wreck field, and you signed the order and moved on, and I took off my helmet in a dead ship because somebody had to. That's the difference between us. It was never strength. You had all the strength. It was that you wouldn't go back, and I did." She stood. "The law you spent your life ruling just chose 6 orphans over their warlord in front of your whole fleet. You did that. You made them choose in the open, and they chose. Live with it. That's the sentence. Live a long time, and watch what the frontier grows into, and know that every warm thing in it is a thing you'd have left in the cold." The warden of the first cold planted its iron staff and spoke the judgment that ended the reign of Draco's Vihenkal, and it was not death, because the first cold did not deal in death. It dealt in warmth and the withholding of it, and the sentence it gave was the oldest and the heaviest the Viharn had. Draco's, who was warlord, the warden said, you ordered the breaking of a true Veloth before the ancestors and the young. You are cast out of every winter. No Viharn hearth will keep you. No wrapping will warm you. No keeper will speak your name to a kit. You who would not go back into the cold for your young will go into the cold alone and stay there for as long as you live. The first cold has spoken. The young have answered. It is finished. They took him away, not the humans and not the six, but his own elite, the six who had bared their throats rather than defend him, who rose from the deck and gathered up their fallen warlord and carried him off the platform in the silence of Viharn, who have watched the ground of their whole lives shift under them. Into the dark, into exile, into the cold, he had spent 11 years sending other people's children to die in. The Armada did not so much surrender as dissolve. There was no one left to surrender it. Draco's was cast out. The crews that had gone dark could not be ordered back into the order of battle by a warlord the first cold had unmade, and the crews that had stayed lit through it all found themselves, in the space of an hour, holding weapons in a fleet that no longer existed, aimed at a frontier that had just, in front of the entire species, proven itself the last place the oldest law was still alive. One by one, and then in squadrons, and then in whole ranks, the hulls of the Ascendancy powered down their guns and ran the 6 words on their flanks and turned, in the black, from the red toward the white. And Ren Halloran stood on a small platform slung between 2 fleets and watched the war she had inherited come to an end, not with a battle, but with 30,000 Viharn deciding, all at once, that they would rather go back for their young than follow a warlord who would not. It's over, Idris Vale said on the channel, in the voice of a man who had spent his whole life in a war and could not quite believe he had lived to see the end of it. Ren, I don't even know what to call what just happened. We didn't win. We didn't lose. The whole thing just stopped. Because they chose. That's the only way a thing like this ever stops, Ren said. She was still on the platform. Ash had come and put its great frost-scarred head against her, and she leaned into it, all her weight, because now that it was over she found she could barely stand. The other 5 gathered around her, checking her, the way they had checked her every morning for 3 years. Is she warm? Is she safe? And she put her hands on them, on whichever one she could reach, and let them hold her up. You don't win people, Idris. You don't beat them into it. You keep the young warm, and you go back for the ones in the cold, and you let everybody watch you do it. And sooner or later they remember they'd rather be the kind of people who do that too. She closed her eyes against Ash's warm plating. That's the whole war. That was always the whole war. Everything else was just how long it took them to remember. Above her, the sky full of Viharn hulls turned, and turned, and turned, red going to white. The armada of the Ascendancy becoming, ship by ship, the fleet of the frontier, until there was no armada left at all, only a great gathering of the Viharn, of both the ones who had defected and the ones who had come to destroy her. All of them turned now the same way, all of them home. The war did not end with a treaty, because there was no longer anyone on the Viharn side with the authority to sign one, and this turned out to be the best thing that could have happened. A treaty would have been 2 powers agreeing to stop. What happened instead was slower and deeper, and could not be undone by any later warlord, because it did not live in a document. It lived in 91 growing kits, and then in 300, and then in numbers no one bothered to count, spread across a frontier that was no longer a battle line but a long warm seam where 2 species had stopped being enemies, one hull at a time. The Ascendancy did not surrender to humanity. The Ascendancy simply stopped being the Ascendancy, because the thing that had held it together was a story. The humans burned the young, and the story was dead, killed not by a fleet but by 3 years of feeds showing 6 kits falling asleep warm, and no one could resurrect it, because everyone had seen. Admiral Reyes came out to the frontier himself, 4 months after the platform, an old man making one of the last long journeys of his career, and he stood on the observation deck of the Solace and watched a warform the size of a shuttle lie on the deck, and let 3 human children from a colonist family climb on it, while their parents stood white-knuckled at the rail, and he shook his head slowly. "The assembly wanted me to bring you home to a medal," Reyes said. "I told them you wouldn't come. I told them the medal was already here, and it had 4 legs and slept on your quarters and would take the hand off anyone who tried to pin anything on you it didn't like." He watched the children shriek with laughter as the war form, it was Bishop, the patient one, rolled with exaggerated care to keep them from sliding off. "How do you explain this to people who weren't here, Ren? I've been trying to write the report for a month. Every version sounds insane." "We didn't win the war, we adopted it." "You don't explain it," Ren said. "You just keep the young warm and you let people come see. Everybody who comes out here and stands where you're standing gets it inside a day. It's the ones who never come that keep writing memos." She leaned on the rail beside him. Ash lay behind them across the whole width of the deck, watching, always watching, its frost scars gone silver now in the healing. "The Viharn have a word for what this is, sir. Not the bond, the bigger thing. What the frontiers become. Tsaruk taught it to me. It doesn't translate cleanly. The closest he can get is the long going back. It means a people that has decided altogether to be the kind that goes back into the cold for the ones who got left. That's what we are now, both of us. That's the treaty. It's not written down because it's not that kind of thing." Reyes was quiet a while. "I spent 40 years fighting them," he said finally. "I lost people I'll never stop missing. And I stood here today and watched colonist kids climb on one like it was a hill." He turned from the rail. "I don't know whether to grieve the whole thing or thank you for it. Maybe both." "Both," Ren said. "It's always both. Tsaruk taught me that too." The wardens of the first cold came back, and that was how everyone finally understood that the old thing had won, and not just the new. They came out of the places Dracos had starved them into, the closed halls and the forgotten orders, a scattering of ancient Viharn who had kept the true law alive in secret through 11 years of a warlord who wanted it dead. And they came to the frontier because the frontier was where the law had proven itself alive, and they took up the work again, the judging of keepings, the witnessing of Veloth, the teaching of the wrapping and the naming and the going back, to a generation of Viharn who had grown up thinking those things were dead. The old warden who had judged Ren on the platform did not live to see much of it. It was very old, and the long journey had spent the last of it, and it died on the frontier one quiet cycle with a kid asleep against its side and a square of silver cloth wrapped once, snug, around its ancient shoulders, because Ren had gone to it in its last hours and kept it warm the way it had, at the end, let the whole galaxy know she could. But before it died it named her, formally in the old rite, before the restored order and both peoples. Not Vale only, but Keeper of the Cold, the human title the wardens invented for her because they had no existing word for a thing that had never happened before. A not Viharn who had filled the oldest law so fully that the law itself had chosen her over a warlord. It was, Tsaruk told her, the highest thing his people had to give, and it had never been given and would likely never be given again. And Ren accepted it the way she accepted everything, quietly, and then went back to the creche, because 3 new orphans had come in on a hauler that morning and they were cold and frightened and needed wrapping. And the highest honor the Viharn had did not, as far as Ren was concerned, excuse her from the actual work of it. "You could let the keepers do that now," Tsaruk said, watching her wrap the newest one, a shivering scrap of a kit that had lost everything, the way she had wrapped Ash 4 years before. "You have 300 keepers. You have a whole order of wardens. You are Keeper of the Cold. No one would think less of you." "They wouldn't settle for me," Ren said, tucking the cloth under the small chin, saying the small thing she said. "New ones never do at first. They need the one who found them." She looked up at him. "Same as the 6 did. Same as you did that first day in the hold, whether you'll admit it or not." Saruk did not admit it. He also did not deny it. He had, over 4 years, stopped needing to be wrapped himself. The cold the war had left in him had thawed slowly in the warmth of a place that kept its young. But he remembered the first day in the hold, when a kit named Ash had climbed his plated body and put its face against his jaw and made the safe sound into him. And he had closed his eyes and not moved because he did not want it to end. And he knew that whatever he was now, advisor, teacher, the old shipmaster who had turned a war carrier toward the white, he had been wrapped that day by a human he came to reclaim a brood from, and had never once been cold since. The going back passed to the young, and that was the thing that told Ren it would outlast her, and it started with Ash. 4 years and some months after the wreck field, a frontier scout found a V-Harn transport adrift in a debris field beyond the old line. A hauler small, its drive dead, its distress beacon so weak it had nearly been missed. It had been running orphans, a keeper on some far edge of the collapsed ascendancy, gathering up the young the old war had scattered, trying to reach the frontier, and had died of a failing hull with her charges still aboard. When the scout's report came in, Ren was 3 jumps away at the creche, and could not have reached the wreck in time. Ash went. It did not ask her. It was grown now, and grave, and it made its own choices as a person makes them. And it took a fast cutter and a handful of the keepers, and it went to the cold hull, and it did the thing its veil had done in the wreck field where she found it. It went aboard the dead ship the old doctrine said to abandon, and it carried out the young, all of them, every one that still lived, wrapped against its own warm plating the way it had once been carried out by a human who took off her helmet against her own law. When the cutter came back, Ren was on the deck to meet it, and Ash came out of the hatch with a kit cupped against its chest in one huge, careful hand. A shivering ash-colored scrap so like what Ash had been that Ren's breath caught, and it crossed the deck to her and lowered itself down so that they were level, and it held the small, cold thing out to her. Not to keep, she understood, to show. "I went back," Ash said in its engine-deep voice, slow with the care of a thing that had learned language warm. "It was cold, and I went back and I got them out." Its low-fire eyes held hers, and there was in them a thing she had spent 4 years pouring into it and had never been sure until this moment had truly taken. "You taught me that the answer to the cold is not more cold. I did not understand it when I was small. I understand it now." It drew the shivering kit back against its own warmth and wrapped one great arm around it the way it had been wrapped and made the safe sound down into it. "I have named this one," Ash said. "Before it's winter. I dared the cold the way you dared it for me. Its name is Ren." And the human called Ren Halloran, keeper of the cold, veil of the frontier, stood on the deck of an old warship named Solace and put her hand against the frost-silvered plating of the first cold thing she had ever pulled out of the dark, and could not speak, because there was nothing left to say that the going back had not already said for her. The panic that gave the whole affair its shape in the end did not stay V-Harn, because the galaxy is not only 2 species, and the others had been watching. They had watched for 4 years, the way one watches a fire in a neighbor's field, the Korrid hegemony with its stone-hulled dreadnoughts, the deep-void Ashelin who had never taken a side in any war and kept their own counsel, the 12 scattered client states that traded along the frontier's edge and reported everything home. They had all seen the feeds, and what they had seen had not comforted them, because it did not fit any of the boxes a galaxy keeps its neighbors in. Humanity was not the fragile young species the ascendancy had described. But humanity was also not the ruthless expanding thing the Korrid had prepared their dreadnoughts for. Humanity was, it turned out, a thing far stranger and far harder to plan against, a species that handed the orphaned young of an enemy that had spent 11 years trying to exterminate it, had not exterminated them back, had not even imprisoned them, had raised them warm and turned the enemy's own children into the thing that ended the enemy's war. Kale Threng Korrid, Warmaster of the Stone Hegemony, said the thing out loud in a council his own aides tried to keep sealed, and it leaked anyway, the way everything leaked in those years, and it became the line the whole galaxy quoted. "I know how to fight a people that hates," the War Master said. "You meet their hate with a wall. I know how to fight a people that fears. You meet their fear with patience. But how do you set a battle line against a people that will take your children out of the cold and raise them to love you? What wall stops that? What weapon answers it? We have spent our whole science on the question of how to make humanity afraid of us. We never once asked the question that mattered, which is what happens to us if humanity decides to keep us." He looked around the sealed council at the warlords and commanders of a hegemony that had, an hour before, considered humanity a manageable problem. "They have not turned that keeping on us. Not yet. Understand me. The most dangerous species in the galaxy has decided that the answer to an enemy is to go back into the cold and carry its children out. And the only reason we are not already inside that embrace is that we have not yet fallen into a wreck where they could find us. Pray we never do. Because I have seen what comes out the other side of it, and it wears our shape, and it calls them mother, and it will not stop until every cold thing in the black is warm and every warm thing is theirs." The commanders of a dozen powers read that leaked line and felt the same cold pass through them that had passed through Tsaruk on the command tier of the Skarn V Hale 4 years before, watching a human draw a silver blanket higher over a sleeping kit. It was not the fear of a weapon. It was the fear of a thing you could not build a defense against, because the thing was kindness with a fleet behind it, and there is no armor for that. Ren, when the leaked line reached the frontier, read it twice and set it down and said only, "He's overcomplicating it," and went back to the creche, and that was the whole of humanity's answer to the panic of the galaxy. A young woman with a square of silver cloth, wrapping a frightened orphan, saying the small thing she said, while a dozen war councils across the black tried and failed to work out how to defend themselves against exactly that. The lethal pole never went away. Peace did not soften the six. It only changed what the edge was for, and the frontier learned once in the 5th year what the edge was still for, and did not need the lesson twice. There were holdouts. There are always holdouts. A hard core of the old ascendancy had gone raider when the warlord fell, Viharn, who could not make the turn, who had lost too much or hated too deep, who had decided that if the frontier would not have their war, then they would bring the war to the frontier. They came in the 5th year, a raiding pack of them, fast and quiet in the old style, and they came for the creche, because they understood as Dracos had understood that the creche was the heart of the thing, and they meant to cut it out. They got as far as the outer ring. Ren was not there for what happened next, and neither was Tsaruk, and neither, mercifully, were any of the kits, who were deep in the warm heart of the station behind a wall of keepers. What was there was the 6. The raiders came for the young of the frontier in the dark, in the old style, expecting prey, and they found between themselves and the creche, the first 6, the ones the human had raised, grown now to their full and terrible size, standing in the dark in the warding posture that 6 kits had once held across a killer in a day cabin, except that the 6 were not kits any longer, and the raiders were not one killer, and the oldest law does not weaken with the size of the thing that holds it. The frontier turned its recorders off that night, by Ren's standing order, the same order Tsaruk had given on the platform, because some things a people does not need to watch even when they are done in its defense. What the frontier knew in the morning was that the creche was untouched, that not one kit had woken, that not one keeper had been harmed, and that the raiding pack that had come in the dark for the young of the frontier would not be coming again, and that the 6 had come back in before dawn and gone to their Vale's quarters and slept in a heap around her the way they always did, and that in the morning Ren Halloran had knelt among them and checked each one over with her own hands, gently, the way she had every morning for 5 years, and had found them whole, and had said the small things she said, and wrapped each of them once in silver, though they were vast now and it was only a gesture, and told them they were safe and kept. "They came back to me and slept," Ren said to Tsaruk later quietly, when the two of them stood on the observation deck, and the Frontier went about its untroubled morning below. After that, they did the thing they had to do, and then they came back and slept around me like kits. I don't Saruk, how do they carry both? How is the same thing that did that in the dark the same thing that lets colonist children climb on it? How do they hold both? Saruk was quiet a long moment, watching the young of two species move together through the warm corridors of a place that 4 years ago had been a battle line. The same way you do, Vale, he said. You went back into a wreck full of the dead and carried out the living, and then you sat down on a cold deck and wrapped a starving kid in silver and told it was safe. That is both. That was always both. The warmth and the going back are not two things. They are one thing seen from two sides. A creature that will not fight for the warm thing does not truly keep it, and a creature that fights for nothing but the fight is only the cold wearing armor. He looked down at the Frontier. You taught them the warmth first, and the warmth taught them what the edge was for. That is the whole of it. That is the thing Dracos never learned, and the thing the War Master of the Corrid is right to fear. The most dangerous thing in the galaxy is not a people that has learned to fight. The galaxy is full of those. The most dangerous thing in the galaxy is a people that has learned to keep, because a people that keeps will go back into any cold and answer any threat and never once stop being gentle with its young, and there is no war that has ever been devised that can defeat a thing like that. You can only join it. He turned his great pale head toward her. Which is what the galaxy is going to spend the next 100 years slowly, terrified, deciding to do. Idris Vale retired in the 6th year, and the Frontier did not know how to let him, because he had become one of its fixed stars, and the Viharn in particular could not understand a warrior choosing to set down his post while he still drew breath. Among us, Saruk told him at the small gathering the humans threw and the Viharn attended in solemn confusion, a war form serves until it falls. To choose to stop, we have no right for it. We do not know how to honor a thing we cannot imagine doing. You honor it by letting a tired old man sit down, Idris said, and the warforms present took this as a formal instruction and adopted it. And for years afterward, whenever a Viharn keeper grew too old for the work, the Frontier would hold a sitting down, and the old one would be formally released from the post and given a warm place by the creche and a kit to keep for the pleasure of it rather than the duty. And the whole thing became one more of the rites. The Frontier grew the way a warm place grows moss, without anyone deciding it, out of a human being kind in a room full of Viharn who wrote everything down. That was the joke of the Frontier, and the humans never stopped finding it funny, and the Viharn never quite understood why it was funny, which made it funnier. The Viharn codified everything. A people that had spent 11 years with a doctrine for how to abandon its young, once it decided to keep them instead, went about the keeping with the same terrible thoroughness. And so every small human habit that drifted into the creche got observed, and studied, and formalized and given a name, and folded into the growing body of Frontier law with a gravity entirely out of proportion to its origins. Ren hummed to the kits. It was a nothing habit, a tuneless under-the-breath thing she did while she worked, the way her own mother had, the way Idris's grandmother had, the way warm human hands had hummed to frighten small things since before there were ships. The Viharn keepers noticed that the kits settled faster when the human made the low sound, and they studied it, and they could not reproduce it. A Viharn throat does not hum, but they refused to let it be lost, and so they built it into an instrument, a small resonant thing tuned to the frequency of a human woman's tuneless comfort, and they placed one in every creche on the Frontier, and a keeper's first duty on taking a shift became to sound the warm tone over the sleeping young. Ren found out about it the way she found out about all of them, by walking into a creche and discovering 300 years of solemn Viharn tradition had grown overnight out of something she did without thinking. And she stood in the doorway and listened to a machine playing her own mother's tuneless hum to a room full of Viharn kits, and had to go out into the corridor for a while. You have to stop being surprised by it, Saruk told her, not unkindly when he found her there. Everything you do, we keep. You have not yet understood the size of what that means. You are not raising 6 war forms or 91 kits or a frontier. You are raising a people. Everything you do carelessly out of warmth, a whole species is writing down and will do on purpose for 10,000 years. The humming, the rapping, the going back, the names given early. You are the brood mother of a civilization that had forgotten how to keep, and it is learning by watching your hands. He looked at her. It is a great deal to put on a person, I know. I have watched it settle on you for 6 years. But there is no one else it could have been, Vale, because it could only ever be the one who took off her helmet in the cold. The law does not choose the strong. It never did. It chooses the one who goes back. The frontier held its naming days every winter's end now. All of them at once. Every kit that had survived its first season named in the same cycle across every creche on the seam. And the whole strange two-species polity stopped its work to say the names. Wren went to as many as she could reach. She could not reach them all anymore. There were too many. The frontier had grown past any one person's ability to hold it. But she went to the ones she could, and she stood before the surviving young and said their names to the assembled keepers, Human and Viharn. And the Viharn answered each name with the single low note. 200 throats or 2,000. The sound she had first felt in the deck through her boots 6 years before, and had never once stopped feeling in her chest. And every naming day at the end, after the new names were given, the frontier said the old ones. It had become the custom, the way customs grow in warm places. After the living young were named, a keeper would read the roll of the ones the cold had taken before their winter. Not many now. The frontier was good at its work, but always some, because the cold does not surrender entirely and the going back does not always come in time, and the names would be given late, spent at last, the debt paid to the young who had not lived to be named early. It was the saddest thing the frontier did and the truest, and it was the exact inversion of the doctrine Saruk had recited over war forms in the old days, the doctrine that would not spend a name early for fear of the cold. The frontier spent every name. Early for the living, late for the lost, but everyone spent, because a people that keeps does not let a single one of its young go unnamed into the dark, no matter which side of the old line it fell on. Wren read the lost roll herself, the first winter's end after Idris sat down, and among the names on it were the brood mothers of the Sethon's warmth, the ones who had died in the wreck field where she found Ash, whose names the frontier had recovered at last from the old ascendancy registries. The mothers who had not lived to name their young, whose young a human had named instead. She read their names aloud to a hold full of 2 species, and 2,000 Viharn answered, and Ash stood at her shoulder as she read the names of the mothers it would never remember. And when she finished it put its great head down against her, and made, very quietly so that only she could feel it, the safe sound giving it back to her, the way it always did, at exactly the moment she needed it, because 6 years on it still knew before she did, when its veil was cold. They'd be proud of you, Wren said to it quietly, meaning the mothers on the roll. Whatever proud is, wherever they are, 6 of you and all of this, they'd be proud. They kept me warm long enough for you to find me, Ash said in its engine-deep voice. That was their keeping. The going back was yours. Both of them are why I am here. It was quiet a moment. That is the thing I will teach the one I named for you when it is old enough to understand it, that it took both. The ones who kept it warm in the cold and the one who went back. It always takes both. Saruk lived long enough to see the frontier stop being a frontier, which is to say he lived long enough to see it stop being the edge of anything and become, instead, the center. The place the young of a dozen species were sent to be kept, the place the wardens of the first cold made their restored hall, the place that historians of both peoples would eventually agree the old war had ended, though no one who had been there ever called it an ending. They called it the turning. The night the fleet came apart in the thaw. The going back that never stopped going. He was very old by then, older than the shipmaster who had watched a feed 4 times on a command tier and been unable to put it down. The plating along his jaw had gone entirely pale, the way the old wardens had, and he moved slowly, and he spent his days now among the young, teaching, because a war form that has learned to keep does not stop keeping. It only trades the edge for the warmth as the edge grows too heavy to carry. The kids climbed on him the way they had climbed on Bishop for the colonist children, and he let them. And when the very small ones asked him, as they always eventually asked him, having heard the songs, whether it was true that he had once been a shipmaster of the old ascendancy, whether it was true that he had come across the black to reclaim the first 6 and had stayed instead, he always told them the truth. "I came to take them back," he would say. "That is true. I was sent to reclaim your kind from the human, and if she would not give you up to see you dead, so that the story of what she had done could not be told." And the kits would go still and wide-eyed, and he would go on, because they needed the rest of it more than they needed to be comforted. "And I walked onto her deck, and 6 of your kind, no bigger than you are now, stood between her and me and would not move. And I stopped. Not because they could have hurt me. They could not. I stopped because I saw a thing I had been told for 11 years did not exist. I saw the oldest law of our people alive on a human warship, kept warm by a small tired woman who did not even know its name. And I understood that everything I had been sent to destroy was the only thing worth living for, and that I had a choice to make, and that I had perhaps a single breath in which to make it." He would look at them, the small warm faces, the low-fire eyes. "I chose the warmth. That is the whole of my life, little ones. I was a killer in the dark for 11 years, and then a human woman kept 6 of your kind warm where I could see it, and I chose the warmth, and I have never once in all the years since been cold. That is the only thing I did that the songs remember. It is the only thing I did that was worth remembering. When your turn comes to choose, and it comes for everyone, choose the warmth. Whatever it costs less than the cold." Ren Halloran grew old on the frontier too, though she never grew old the way the pictures of admirals grow old, because she never once let anyone make her into a picture of an admiral. She stayed the small, plain, calm woman who had taken off her helmet in a wreck, and she kept working, and she kept the young warm with her own hands long past any age at which she needed to, because the new ones would not settle for anyone else at first, and she could not bear to make them try. The 6 outlived Saruk, and they outlived Idris, and in the fullness of their long Viharn lives they would outlive Ren too, though none of them let themselves think about it, and they never left her. 60 years old, 70, small and gray and slow, and every night she still went asleep on the deck of her quarters under a heap of war forms, because they would not settle unless she was there, and it turned out that after all those years she still would not settle unless they were either. Ash slept against her the way it had slept against her as a kit, grown to the size of a shuttle and gone silver pale with age, its great head near hers, and every morning of her life its first thought on waking was the same thought it had woken with as a 2-month-old orphan in a rebuilt medical bay. Where is she? Is she warm? Is she safe? She was. For the rest of her life, from the wreck field to the end, whatever else the galaxy did around them, Ren Halloran was warm and she was safe, because she was never for 1 hour of it alone. She had gone back into the cold for 6 things the universe had thrown away, and they had spent the whole of themselves every day for the rest of their lives, making sure the cold never touched her again. That was the bargain. She had not known she was making it when she took off her helmet. Neither had they. But it held, the way the oldest law holds, deeper than clan and deeper than command and deeper than the fear of every commander in a galaxy that had spent a generation trying and failing to work out how to defend itself against a people that keeps. On the last night, they say, and the frontier has its songs now, and this is the end of all of them, she went asleep the way she always went to sleep, on the deck, under the warm weight of the ones she had raised, with the silver cloth she still wrapped them in every night, gesture though it was, folded in her hand. And they say that in the deep watch Ash woke, the way it always woke before she needed it, and found that the cold had come for its veil at last in the one way that even the going back cannot answer, and that it did not make the warding cry because there was no threat in the room, only the oldest cold of all, the one that comes for everything warm in the end. And they say it did the only thing there was left to do, the thing she had taught it in a wreck when it was small enough to die, the last keeping given back. It wrapped itself around her, and it made the safe sound low into the top of her head, where she could feel it more than hear it, the way she had made it into the top of its small, shuddering back on the first night of both their lives. "You're safe, I've got you. Nobody's taking you." And it kept her warm until the morning, and it did not let her be cold, and it did not let her be alone, because that was the law she had brought back into a galaxy that had forgotten it, the only law that ever mattered, the law she had filled to the last drop before she knew its name, that you go back into the cold for the ones who got left, and you keep them warm, and you never ever let them go into the dark by themselves. The frontier she raised keeps it still. It goes back for them, everyone, on every seam of the black, human and Viharn and now a dozen more, and it names them early and it wraps them warm and it sounds the tuneless human hum over their sleep. And when the historians ask where it all began, the keepers do not point to a treaty or a battle or the night the fleet came apart in the thaw. They point to a small tired woman on a cold deck, wrapping a starving thing in silver, saying the only words that ever won the war. "You're staying, you're all staying. Nobody's taking you. You're staying."